Welcome to the Atheist Roundtable, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's going to be an exciting episode, and we got something special on hand this Tuesday evening. And I am Oz. I am your host, and as always, the man, Jesus Mike. What's going down,
What's
man?
up? Not much, man. I'm excited for this show. This will be interesting. This has been an awesome series of days that we've had. I know you've been busy with work. I've been busy with work and about to head back to school and all that, but we've crammed it in. So we thank everybody that's also taking time out of their day to come and watch us, and anybody that's watching this in the future, or even right now, if you stumble upon this because you're questioning your faith or anything like that, you know that there are resources there for you. If you're into more of a secular therapy type of situation and you don't want the religious dogma kind of pushed into you, you got the Secular Therapy Project. You also have Recovering from Religion if you are just dealing with some trauma. And there's also the Clergy Project for people that are in the ministry, pastors, priests, things like that. So we urge you to look into those for family, friends, or yourself. So, but other than that,
Sure.
I've been great, man.
Good. Yeah, we everybody's starting to get back to work now after the quarantines and everything. And yeah, I got off work and I went and had a date night with my beautiful Mrs. to be, and then came right here and jumped on screen to do this. And I've been excited all day thinking about this. So before we get into to the meat of this, I just want to remind everybody our website is tart.live. So TART.live. You can check us out there if you want to be on the show. You can go there. There's a link to have a seat at the round table, or if you want the easy way, just email me at austin@tart.live, and we'll schedule a time to get you on here. Also, our newest merchandise is available on there. We got bracelet, new bracelet, hat, cups, T-shirts, everything. And if you support the Mute Oz movement, there is a limited edition shirt there. And then the Tart shirt that I have on right now, regular price is $25.99, and the on sale price is $25.99. That includes,
you dropped a penny from the last show.
So that includes your tithe and offering for the week. So
join us in a week from now, and it'll be 7 cents off the value. So,
and last but not least, on that, we are on Patreon. So if you want to support us and what we're doing here on our platform, on our channel, go to patreon.com and search the Atheist Roundtable, or the link is there below. You can check us out right down there. And I just want to say a big shout out. We have 5 or 6 Patreons now after the last week or so, and mad love for you guys, and we appreciate the support, and we'll continue to fine tune that and make sure you guys are getting special little things for the investment that you make into our channel and what you're doing to support us. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. We have a very special guest with us tonight.
I was about to leave.
Where somebody mute him. The mute off is over. It's now mute. Jesus, Mike. But we're very, very excited to have this gentleman with us. And tonight, our special guest.
Thank you, producers. I appreciate that. Now that the real host is here.
No, but we want to bring on our special guest for the night, David. We're super pumped and excited to have you with us tonight, sir. How are you tonight?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Good. We've been anticipating this for the last week or two since we kind of got this on the calendar, and my plans tonight are to, I have my notebook in front of me, is to actually mute myself and just take notes, listen, and learn, if I can just be honest. But David, before we dig into it, would you please share with all of us, the viewers and listeners that are with us, what your background is, education, what you do currently? That way I'll have a full understanding, and then we'll get down to business.
Okay, great. So I'm originally from Italy. I was born there and lived there about 20 years. So I started school in Italy. I studied at the University of Bologna, and eventually I moved to the United States. I had some credits at the University of California, but I ultimately got my PhD in physics at the University of Maryland at College Park, which is just outside Washington, D.C. And as a graduate student, I realized that I was very interested in the ideas of relativity. And so I ended up studying black holes, because black holes are the place in the universe where the strangest relativistic effects occur. And now, I did a postdoc at NASA and Caltech, and then eventually started teaching. And now I'm a professor at Kennesaw State University. And I do research in black hole astrophysics. So that's sort of a quick background.
Very good. No, thank you for sharing that. That way, like I said, everybody's on the up and up. What's going on and what they're getting into in this conversation. And I'm going to very, very respectfully hand this off now to Jesus Mike, as far as kind of conducting the conversation that we're going to have tonight. And Jesus Mike, where do you want to start? What are we talking about tonight?
Oh man, we could fire right into it, I guess. We could just go straight for the jugular, so to speak, right? No, I guess maybe if maybe we could just start off. Let's start off in just the realm of science, and maybe we could work up from there. Why do you think it would be important for somebody to have a good understanding of really any type of scientific theory or understanding? Why would you see? What value do you see in it? And also, on the flip side, what potential dangers?
It's hard to imagine anything more important than scientific issues, especially nowadays. In particular, we're living through a phase that sort of expresses this idea to the fullest, right? Medicine is crucial. I'm in a science that's a little bit more abstract and not directly relevant. And I kind of tell myself a narrative or make excuses for why that is. And the reason is that I want to stay away from the practical world as much as possible. And so I sort of move into exotic spaces. Because dealing with people is very difficult, and especially when it really matters, right? When it's life and death situations, it's very painful to not get the right answer, not to take the right approach.
Sure.
But no one's going to get hurt if we don't understand black hole astrophysics. So
yeah,
that's why I chose it.
Yeah, and that's
as long as it's purely academic. But the strange thing is that Einstein, when he was thinking of space and time and putting these ideas together, in his mind it was just curiosity, right?
Mm.
But then you look 100 years later and these things are all over the place in terms of their practical applications, right? The GPS is based on both special and general relativity. When I was a postdoc at NASA, in fact, my office mate was doing the calculations for the effects of general relativity that need to be incorporated in the I don't remember what it is, 18 or 36 satellites that are needed for the GPS. So these satellites are at different heights from the Earth, and depending on how fast they're moving and how far away from the Earth, they experience different rates of the passage of time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
yeah.
So it's amazing that something that's purely just curiosity at some point in time then ends up having practical applications. The same is true of quantum physics.
Sure.
Quantum physics was really born in 1901. There was sort of a pause in between, the 20-year pause between the first ideas and the time when the theory was sort of fully formulated.
Sure.
Before all the controversy started.
Well, yeah, and that would actually. But
it was pure intellectual curiosity at the beginning, right? Now it's what is it? 80% of the what is it? The GDP is based on technology that has quantum mechanics built into it.
Yeah, and within that realm of quantum mechanics, I guess we could just start off with a definition quickly. What is an interpretation of quantum mechanics to you?
So I taught at Columbia University for a year, and there's a physicist there who hates this description. Mm-hmm. So he doesn't like people talking about interpretations of quantum mechanics, and the idea is that there are different theories of quantum physics and not interpretations. And in fact, these different versions of quantum theory, if you will,
Yeah.
Are fundamentally very different. As far as what you can observe, they're all pointing at the same kinds of data, at least where we are today. The kinds of experiments that we can conduct today. All of these versions, if you want, or theories of quantum physics, predict the same results. But there are good reasons, according to some people, to believe that the underlying explanation for this can be one thing or another, and the differences are dramatic.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. From my limited study, you have the Copenhagen interpretation and the many worlds and things like that. Would you find any of those more convincing than the other, or do you subscribe to many of the many worlds interpretation over the Copenhagen? Or
so we can talk about these things. There are issues that need to be resolved in this so-called Copenhagen interpretation, and these issues disappear in you referred to it as the many worlds, I think, interpretation or theory. And so there's a sense in which the many worlds version is more attractive because it's simpler in one respect. It has fewer ideas behind it. It's just the Schrödinger equation. If you've ever heard of the Schrödinger equation.
Yeah.
It's just this one equation there, and that's all the many worlds version of quantum theory requires. The Copenhagen interpretation requires additional structure, additional explanations.
Okay, and
we can get into that. So there's a sense in which one is more attractive. So you have to first agree that a concept of simplicity is something that you aim for, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So an explanation that's simpler. So, for example, just to give a sort of a rough idea of that, how did I spend my day and how did I end up here tonight? We could have different explanations. One is, I was near my house. I walked my dogs and I played with my kids, and then I sat down and connected to the internet, and here I am. Another explanation is I actually participated in the voyage to the International Space Station, right? And then I traveled during the day and finally got here at the last minute and hooked up to the internet. Both of these are compatible with physical laws, right?
Sure.
But clearly one is a lot less probable, so it's a much worse explanation.
So it kind of almost mirrors the idea of the underdetermination principle or something, where you have all these rival theories supported by essentially the same evidence.
Right. So you want to choose the one that's more attractive, has this feature, which is that it's simpler.
Sure. And
it's more probable in that sense too.
Well, and this would be this would be my last question on that frame. Then I want to move into some questions about how people interpret this and use it advantageously to to their motives or whatever. Why do you think that there is so much controversy within interpreting quantum mechanics? So
there's a history of this. We're going back to the 1920s, and you have to think a little bit about the structure of quantum theory. And the basic idea behind this is the notion of superposition. So when you solve the Schrödinger equation, you get the state of a physical system. So usually we're talking about the positions of atoms, right? These are small systems, and you could be dealing with an electron. Where is the electron? Well, the classical picture of things being in space at different moments in time, that no longer works. Okay, and so there's a whole bunch of experimental evidence that leads to a picture, which leads to a theoretical picture, which is basically captured by the Schrödinger equation. And the Schrödinger equation gives you a wave-like quantity as its solution. And this wave-like quantity appears in other branches of physics. So we know what the wave represents. It represents like a water wave, a bunch of particles moving together and crashing together. If they crash together, we kind
create a bigger,
right. You can create. You see those. You drop a rock in a pond and you see the waves spread out. It's the same kind of math.
Yeah.
right? Quantum physics obeys the same kind of math of waves.
It would give you the same like interference pattern on
exactly. So if I drop two rocks in a pond, I see these two waves spread out, but then they overlap, and there are places where the wave is a little higher than the single wave, and there are places where the wave is not high at all. That's the result of the interference. Okay, so we know how to interpret that in every other branch of physics. When it comes to quantum physics, suddenly we don't like to do what we do in every other branch of physics, and we do something else. And there's a problem there, according to some people, because they say we should do the same thing that we do in every other branch of physics when we see wave interference. So the key issue here is that the Schrödinger equation gives you a wave, but this wave has in its mathematical structure different possibilities. Okay, so if you're dealing with one object, it's basically telling you that the electron, if that's what you're dealing with, if that's your physical system, the electron somewhere in space near an atom, let's say, it's telling you that your mathematical description, which is supposed to capture everything about the system, involves an electron that's both over here and over there. That's the simplest possible case. In reality, the electron is in many different places, all at one moment in time.
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
Well, and so I think that would kind of lead us into perhaps the observer effect and how people interpret the conscious act of it as opposed to perhaps the measuring device, right?
So just playing around with this and doing the experiments, right? You're led to this mathematical description where the electron, you're playing around with the electron, and the exact state of the system is a superposition of the electron being in many places at once. When you do an experiment to find out where it is, well, you can do that. You'll find that the electron is at one specific location. You're never going to find the electron at many different places. Right? So the result of an experiment is a well-behaved electron. It's at some specific location. One of the locations that was in the mathematical function, the solution to the Schrödinger equation. Right?
Yeah.
So when you have this Schrödinger equation solution, you have this wave. You have a bunch of different positions in there, and you have them all balanced out by certain weights. You can have 90% that's more over here, 5% that it's over there, and 5% that it's over there. And then when you do the experiment, you might end up getting it over there. But then you do the experiment again and again and again. You set up the system in the same way. You'll find that 90% of the time, the electron is found where the wave function is weighted at 90%. Okay. And you'll find that it's in that other place 5%, and other place 5%. Right. So you recover the predictions of the wave function in some sense statistically by doing many experiments. But when you do it one time, the electron can be found anywhere of the many possibilities that are in the math.
So essentially, if you're doing this with like a double slit and it's going through, you're just doing this thousands upon thousands of times to get a more accurate picture.
You can do it once if you want. Where will you find it? Well, you'll find it at any of the possible locations that are in the wave function. You don't know where. You can't predict where.
Sure.
But if you do it 100 times, you'll in fact find that it's most likely to be found right behind the center of the screen. If you have the two slits here, right? The interference pattern will give you a greatest probability right behind the center of the screen, and that's where you'll get the most number of hits. But you can never predict where one particle will be. So the question is, if the reality of the system before you do the experiment is a superposition where the electron is in many possible states at once, how do you go from that to getting the specific outcome where the particle is at one of those locations? What's going on? The Schrödinger equation. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say, that's part of the wave function collapsing?
Right. Okay. But where is this wave function collapsing? So in every other branch of physics, right, we have a description of what's going on. If you solve the Schrödinger equation, what you get is a superposition of many different positions in this case.
Gotcha.
Right. But you don't see collapse. It's not that you put t equals 0 seconds, t equals 1 second, t equals 1 hour into the math, and you get a collapse. There's no collapse there. You just have a superposition that goes on indefinitely.
Okay. Yeah.
Right?
And
yeah.
well, sorry, and I just wanted to get a more so on the like these types of interpretations, because you get like something like the observer effect, where people are saying, well, there's
So
this.
what's the observer effect? So
yeah.
Sorry,
no, go on. I'm sorry.
In this Copenhagen interpretation, which is the first kind of idea behind how to interpret these results, the idea was that it's the act of making an observation, right? You make the observation, and that's what changes things from the superposition that you had into a definite position. Right? So after you make the measurement, the electron is at a definite position. That's the new state of the electron. It's at that location on the screen. It's no longer in a superposition. But when you solve the Schrödinger equation, you don't have that evolution emerge from the math. You just have the superposition that lives on forever. So how do you go from one to the other? This is the measurement problem that you have in this Copenhagen interpretation.
Yeah.
And so you have to add some structure there. You have to add something that explains to you how you go from one thing, the superposition, to the actual outcome that you observe. And so there's a long history here, but people were saying, well, it's got something to do with minds, right? You make an observation.
Yeah.
So make a long story short, I think mostly in the 1990s, these kinds of things were settled. It's something called decoherence.
Yeah.
It's not. First of all, what does it mean to observe something? To observe something, you have to get your quantum system that's in a superposition to interact with something, and that something is physical. So it could be a particle of light that hits your system, and that's starting to decohere the system. Your isolated system. So these superposition states are very difficult to achieve. You have to isolate a system. Right? If you have the outside world influencing it, it's very hard to get a superposition state. It quickly falls apart. And so the idea here is that if you have this kind of strange superposition state, and you start to let your system feel the external world,
so
it will quickly
it's kind of bumping it. Is it like essentially electrons are kind of like bumping into each other, so to speak, or how
whatever it is that's constituting the outside of the system. So the bus goes down the street and it moves your building. You manage to get something in a superposition. It's unstable, and that jolting around is causing a wave, right? A pressure wave through the air, and that affects your system. It collapses, and now it's no longer in a superposition.
Sure. And so, I know this is going to be just brash right off the bat, but since we are a show that deals with a lot of theists and atheists and things like that, do you think modern religion fits anywhere within the realm of quantum physics? And is there or philosophical implications or conclusions that you've drawn from your own studies?
Okay, so most of the ideas that involve so-called observer effect, they just ignore this history. Right, so if you go back, you'll see many books, even today. I'm not an expert. I'm not an expert on quantum physics, but you go back to the 1970s. There are books that were written that try to connect some of these ideas to Eastern mysticism. And there was one book in particular that actually used some ideas that were actually shown not to be correct before the book went into publication, but the book ended up being published anyway. So what I would say is that if the Copenhagen interpretation is the right way to think about quantum physics, and that's not the only version, right? So there are other versions that have no collapse at all, right? So you certainly can't use observer effects in those other versions. But I think it's fair to say, and people who study this and who study this at the level of the math will tell you that decoherence, There's a physical process that takes a superposition state and breaks it apart, gets rid of it, collapses the wave function. That's a completely physical process that now has been well understood. I think they would argue that the understanding really started to come into play in the 90s, and I think it's just evolved to a better understanding.
Sure. Okay. And so Ben, if you want to kind of segue in, I don't want to take everybody's time because I am a nerd, and
I was about to say there's a lot of this that kind of goes over my head.
I had just like a list of some questions, and I don't think I went through a lot of them because I just wanted to nerd out on that. So I feel like I'd love to actually chat with you, David, more, especially outside the show on this kind of thing, and poke your brain. That'd be awesome. But in the final thought section, I want to kind of bridge some of the theistic elements and things like that, and we can kind of have a discussion there about it. But Ben, if you want to kind of take away the conversation.
I think I saw a comment, and I hope I don't take Murder Shed Steve's thunder here, but in there I saw somebody asking about Deepak Chopra's quote unquote quantum healing. Have you ever heard of quantum healing, or is that like a word that you've heard of, and how does that relate to some of the things that you're involved with?
I've heard of things. I don't really know what they mean.
That's typically where I get lost. Like I hear the word quantum healing and I just kind of zone out after a second. I was just curious if that's something that comes up to you in your line of work, or if it reaches your level of scholarship, or maybe that's just where we are.
But again, I don't do in the research that I do. It's black hole astrophysics.
Right.
There's nothing about quantum mechanics that I actually need to do that research.
Okay.
So it's relativity, and relativity is a classical theory.
Okay.
But if you're interested in where people think solutions to the most fundamental problems are in physics, which is combining general relativity with quantum physics, it's actually near black holes.
Wow. Yeah. And that actually leads into my second question, which was like, what are the most interesting or useful findings from the last 25 years? Like to a layperson like me, where, I'm just a regular old, guy on the street. What about black holes would you find the most interesting and or useful to someone like me?
I thought you were going to ask me about quantum physics.
Well, no, I was thinking about quantum healing just because somebody was asking in the comments, and that goes along with more kind of spacey stuff or abstract.
We talk about black holes, but that's going to now take us in a different direction.
Okay. That's fine. I'm fine leaving leaving quantum physics then.
Okay.
Because I'm willing to listen to about black holes and just kind of what's useful.
Very quickly, what is it that I do with black holes? Well, what are people doing with black holes in astrophysics? Well, up until the early 1990s, people thought that galaxies were just collections of gas, dust, and stars. And there were all sorts of interesting questions about how stars form, how long they live, and so on. Many of those questions were answered. But what people started to realize, and essentially with data from the Hubble Space Telescope that went up in the early 1990s, was that there was another fundamental ingredient in galaxies that really influences how galaxies are formed. And this involves giant black holes at the centers of galaxies. And so astronomers started to uncover relationships between a giant black hole and the rest of the galaxy. But these giant black holes, right, to give you a sense of scale, these giant black holes, if the United States is the galaxy, right, so it's a spiral, a flat galaxy with stuff rotating around, and it's the size of the United States. The biggest black holes that astronomers have measured would be about the size of my fingernail, right, on that scale. So spatially, the giant black hole is completely irrelevant to the galaxy. Then you can ask, well, does the black hole have such great, strong gravity that it can still affect the entire galaxy? Well, you can do the calculation. How far would you have to move from this fingernail-sized black hole that's somewhere in Kansas, right? That's in the middle of the United States, roughly speaking. How
Yeah.
far would you have to move before the stuff in the galaxy no longer feels the black hole's gravity, but starts to feel all the gravity from all the other stuff, the stars and the gas that are everywhere else? And the answer is about 20 centimeters. Right. So you have this giant black hole at the center of the United States, and you move 20 centimeters away from it, and the stuff no longer feels the black hole. So how is it that galaxies know about their black holes? How is it that gas, dust, and stars in New York are moving in such a way that their speeds are correlated with the mass of the black hole? Right? These are tight correlations. Right? You can't just dismiss them. What's the cause of these correlations? You look at a bigger galaxy, the stars, in California are moving in erratic ways. They're not moving around the black hole. They're moving in erratic ways, but they're moving faster if the mass of the black hole in Kansas, that can't influence anything gravitationally, is bigger, and they scale together.
So
that's one correlation. Sorry.
So in order for so we're saying we're in Kansas, and you're saying that it is influencing stuff like in New York.
Well, as far as we understand, it can't be influencing anything gravitationally because it just doesn't have enough gravity. Right? The gravitational influence is 20 centimeters. Beyond that, the stuff feels the gravity of everything else that's near it, not the black hole. Right?
So is that then like the question, the starting place for your field then?
Right. We're ultimately trying to understand how is it that black holes influence their galaxies? Or is it the other way around? Is it a galaxy that forms, and depending on what's happening further away, eventually that influences how big the black hole at the center becomes? So maybe it's the other way around. What's the connection? One thing is influencing the other.
Yeah, that's so just interesting to me, that because my whole understanding up to this point was that in order for it to for a black hole to have an influence on stuff that's outside of it, it would have to have mass and therefore gravitational pull. And so this would be like a whole new idea for me.
Well, it definitely has gravitational pull.
So it has both, it's got both gravitational pull and are you saying it's like a mysterious force then right now, or like a question mark?
There's nothing very mysterious about the gravitational force. Right? We have a theory, which is general relativity. We can do the calculations. We can see exactly how strong the gravitational force is, and it's clearly not responsible for doing what's going on in galaxies. So it's not gravity by itself. It's got to be something else. So now there are hints, and we can talk about that, but that's sort of the bottom line.
Okay. And I guess I was looking at some of the research just on your website that you've published recently, and I just had a question come to my mind. Are you working on anything now? And then I was going to ask about whether like COVID is getting in the way, or how is COVID impacting your work, just kind of thinking current events.
My collaborators are in distant parts of the world. So we've been interacting, via Zoom and Skype and email and so on. I recently gave a talk via Zoom in China. It's 12-hour difference. Mm-hmm. So that hasn't affected me that much.
So that was already normal then, talking through Zoom and a lot of your work.
Yeah, it hasn't really affected my research. I do research. A lot of research in astronomy is big collaborations, and I work with very few people. Okay.
And let's see. I was just going to try to see, like, are you at liberty to talk about what you're working on now specifically, or
sure.
Is it? Yeah, I'm very interested.
It's a number of things. So over the last 10 years, I've sort of developed a theory that addresses some of these questions. How is it that black holes are affected and affect galaxies? And research is sort of broken up into theory and observation. So people who do observations are kind of like experimentalists. They do experiments. They observe. They look at data. And theorists try to explain things, right? They come up with ideas, they try to explain data. I'm a theorist, but I pay attention to data. So I'm always looking for data to try to explain, to see if I can fit that data within my ideas.
Because that's interesting, because sometimes somebody will send me like a paper trying to prove a point or like trying to explain like an idea, but in reality that paper is so like it's either a case study or like a single observation, and they're trying to say that maybe this single observation disproves a whole field. Like, so what would you say about like that kind of argument then? If somebody's using like a single paper, how would you go about fitting that into a larger framework? Like if
So if we're talking about something that we call a scientific theory, then that kind of thing, that's a sort of that's an idea, right? Or a set of ideas, but that's so well tested that you're not going to have, for example, gravity, right? There's the force of gravity, and it behaves in a certain way, and you can do the experiment anywhere on Earth, and you can sort of predict mathematically, what the height is of my phone here as I drop it from a certain height. And I can get a mathematical equation. That equation is y equals 1/2 gt squared, where t is the time and g is the acceleration of gravity. Wherever you are, you'll find that that's obeyed. So you're not going to find a paper, right? It doesn't make sense to have a paper that talks about one observation that disproves a theory, because that theory is based on so much data, so many observations that it's a solid kind of object. Right? Now you can look at the history of theories that have been replaced and see what it takes to do that. But it's not a paper that someone publishes and says, "Oh, we have to throw this theory out the window." Right?
Are you familiar with like any old theories that I may not have heard of about like explaining whether it's gravity and astrophysics, or are there any old
for example,
theories?
Newton's theory of gravity, right? Newton's theory of gravity says that the Earth is pulling on things, it pulls on the moon, and the moon therefore is falling toward the Earth because there's a gravitational pull. There's a force there. It's a gravitational force. And then Einstein comes along and explains a bunch of things and produces a new picture, and in some sense completely replaces Newton's theory. But how does it make sense that Newton's theory explains so many things and continues to explain so many things? We don't need general relativity to explain how things move near the Earth, right? So satellites, for example, Newton's theory is good enough. So when you look at general relativity, that ultimately, in terms of principles, gives a completely different picture of what gravity is. It's no longer a force; it's what's called the curvature of space-time.
Yeah,
a different conception. You'll see Newton's equations in the appropriate limit where you expect that Newton's theory works well. You'll see them emerge from the strange equations of relativity. So this idea that you just throw theories out the window and you replace them, if something has experienced many observations and has lasted sort of the test of time, there's something about it that's right, and it's going to stay in the more general theory that then encompasses it. That's sort of what happened with general relativity. It's not that Newton's completely wrong and we just throw him in the trash.
You kind of fold it into a greater body of knowledge,
right? And then you explain with general relativity, you explain everything that Newton's theory explains plus more.
Okay, yeah, because you have special circumstances that don't happen close to the Earth. And I heard you use the phrase "the curvature of space and time." I've also heard it like, is that the same thing that people are referring to when they say the fabric of space and time, or like can you talk a little bit about what that means, like space?
Yeah, so the space-time entity, it's a very strange conception, but you can avoid that and talk about curvature or warping of space and time. But that doesn't really shed any additional light on what's actually going on. But space and time are connected in some mathematical way such that certain things are constant. They don't change. That's one of the basic ideas of the theory of relativity. The speed of light is a constant. Okay, so it doesn't matter how fast I move, right? So if I sit here and I turn my flashlight on, the flashlight emits a particle of light. It travels at the speed of light. That's pretty fast, away from me. And if at the same time that I turn my flashlight on, you start to run toward that particle of light, you would expect that the particle of light is moving away from you slightly less than the speed of light because you're moving towards it. Turns out that's not the case. The particle of light is moving away from me at the speed of light and away from you at the speed of light as well. So the speed of light is a constant, but something very strange is happening because how is that possible? Aren't you in some sense catching up to the particle of light? And the answer is no. It's always moving away from you at the speed of light. So it's not there are assumptions about space and time that allow your intuition that you can catch up to light to fall apart.
Right.
And so space and time have to be malleable in some sense. So
Okay.
depending on how you move, space and time is going to change.
And I don't know how loosely this relates, but like one of the things that I typically say, like in order for something to exist, whatever it is that has the characteristics of existence, it takes up space and time. Is there anything that you would add to that or change about that phrasing so that I could be more accurate?
Yeah. The space-time matter picture, right? This is what physics has been about since its inception. It's things moving in space as time passes. And we thought that space and time were just given. There was nothing to think about too deeply. Although people were thinking about time, but ultimately they concluded, like Newton did, that time is just some kind of clock that's ticking away in the background. And space never needed to be explained. It's just sort of the collection of all possible positions. And there was nothing terribly mysterious about that. That whole picture is wrong. And relativity is telling us that depending on where you are in the universe and how you're moving, space and time are different. And that leads to really strange ideas about the past, the present, and the future. But ultimately, to answer your question more directly, physics is sort of moving now away from the space-time matter picture to something that's more fundamental. So there are good reasons to believe that there's something more fundamental than that, and that space-time and matter are not fundamental at all, but they emerge, kind of like Newton's equations emerge out of the theory of relativity, right? The space-time matter picture emerges from something that's more fundamental, but there's no consensus on what that more fundamental thing is.
That was going to be my next question is, like, if somebody tries to claim what these properties are that are emerging from space, they're claiming the fundamental
properties. What are fundamental properties, right?
Yeah. So if anybody tries to insert a claim, like that's typically, I just got in a conversation today where somebody said this was actually the reason that they thought God existed. What they decided to use the evidence, and again, this is where this is coming from. Is it possible that and I know you might not concern yourself so much with these questions, but, is this a good reason for, theists to insert God? Because we don't know.
Well, it would be a little surprising to think, so I'm not an expert on religion, but there are ideas about God somehow existing, I don't know, outside of space and time or fully within space and time for all times and all space or something like that. It would be a little strange for science to be suggesting that the underlying nature of reality is something very different from space and time, and for God, if God is the most fundamental kind of thing, to be mostly concerned with space and time, right?
And I guess,
well,
this would be. Oh yeah, I'm sorry, Mike.
I'm sorry. We're gonna move to Q&A here. Sorry about that. I'm moving my camera around. We're gonna move to Q&A here. Is Is that all right with you guys? We want to try to get
Sure.
a couple people have some questions.
It will be. I've got like one more just like pressing thing. Is it possible for that fundamental property to interact with like things on Earth specifically without interacting with like the universe as a whole, or like?
Okay, so you're dealing with quantum mechanics and relativity together.
And my question may be totally off base, but
and again, this is not my field at all, but I can give you a sense of what people are thinking about. What they're trying to do is to see in the equations that they're putting together, trying to see space and time emerge from the mathematics. And this mathematics actually involves quantum physics and something called entanglement. Okay, and so things so in quantum physics, fundamental kinds of things involve greater or lesser degrees of entanglement, and the idea is that maybe close regions of space as opposed to distant regions of space involve different degrees of entanglement, but the more fundamental thing would be quantum entanglement. That's what they're thinking.
Okay.
So this is very much at the frontier.
Yeah, thank you for answering, because that gives me a lot to chew on and a lot to look into. So
yeah, me and Ben are like kids in candy stores.
Yeah.
It's like the equivalence of if we were talking to Sean Carroll, just because I feel like me and Ben can recognize the ignorance that we
I'm
have
just getting
on it.
kind of things from people like him, but
Yeah, but it's
my
interesting.
area.
It's better than what most people do, which is, I saw this video on YouTube, so I know things about quantum physics. It's like, well, let's actually talk to an educator about that. So thank you, Ben. Again, thank you, David. We're going to move on to questions with Murder Shed Steve. So if you have questions, please ask them. It's not too late. Go ahead and leave them there, but roll it, producers.
They're back there.
So it's time for Q&A with Murder Shed Steve.
Wait. Can you provide evidence that a god exists? Oh. Well, hello, everybody. I got this new book in the mail, and I think I'm going to have to dig into it. Maybe we'll read little bits here and there on the show. Anyway, how we doing, everybody?
Great.
David, thank you for responding. How's it going? Cease to know.
David, this is our murdering friend.
There's Cease to know.
Yeah, I didn't
recognize him.
Hey, David. Yeah, so we're brothers.
We are.
Thank you for.
Where have you been hiding this evening? This is the first time I see you.
Yeah, I was backstage. I was watching the whole thing and thinking of questions for you. My internet keeps dying, so I went to my phone instead.
Welcome both of you to the show. I got some questions right off the bat, and actually the first one here that I was going to do, you kind of just fielded, but we had a question from Mark about entanglement. So if there's any little tidbits you want to elaborate on or anything, feel free. If not, if you feel like you did a pretty decent synapse there, I think we can just move on.
I assume Mark is not.
David? Can you hear me?
I'm sorry. This is for me?
Yeah. Yep.
I see it. There's a question there.
Yeah.
Paying attention to the screen.
That's okay. So Mark said, can you give us a brief description of quantum entanglement?
Yeah.
How far apart the entangled particles can be from each other in space, and if scientists understand how this is happening.
Right. So this involves Einstein's last great contribution. I guess you can call it that way. In the early 1930s, he wasn't a fan of quantum physics. He said it was fundamentally incomplete, and he attacked this idea of entanglement. And the idea is that if you play around with a quantum system, which basically means you're playing around with small objects, atoms, particles, small particles, you can put them into a state where you have two particles that know something about each other in some sense, and that works something like this. So if you entangle them, and then you send these particles away from each other, and you make a measurement of some feature of one of these particles, depending on what you get, you know what the feature of the other particle is, what that specific characteristic that you measured is for the other particle, because the particles are connected in some way, they're entangled. Okay, so but the weird thing about quantum physics is that these particles can be in a superposition state, as we talked about at the beginning. So certain features are not specified, right? So it doesn't have to be the position, but it could be, let's invent a quantity, a feature. Let's say particles have a color, right? Black or white. Those are actually not colors, but whatever. Red or blue, right? So these two particles could be red or blue, and they're now in an entangled state, but they're in a superposition of red and blue. So if you move them far apart, they're traveling away from each other, and I measure the color of the particle that's moving in this direction, and I find that it's blue, I automatically know that the particle that's very far away, that can't be influenced through space by the other particle, must be the other color, which I think I said this one's blue, that one must be red, and vice versa. So the other particle automatically, its wave function collapses, if you want to use that terminology, right? Something's going on, that automatically collapses to a specific property. How can they communicate through vast distances in space? And Einstein said that's impossible. That's spooky action at a distance. It doesn't happen. The reality is the theory is incomplete, and we don't know. The theory doesn't know which color the particles are, but one was really blue the whole time, and the other one was red the whole time. We know that that's not right. Einstein was wrong in this respect.
Right.
So there were simple ways to test that, and the experiments were done in the early 1980s, and it turns out Einstein was wrong. There's no underlying actual fixed state. The complete state must be the superposition.
And that's pretty much a perfect example of why the scientific method works so well. We seek to falsify things, right?
And why ultimately authority is not the final word, right?
Correct.
People who have made huge contributions will most likely make mistakes later on.
Or be influenced in some way.
That's right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
There are plenty of examples of that, of course.
So I've got a question from the God of hangovers. Question for you, David. Are tachyons possible? And I hope I'm saying that right.
Tachyons.
Goodness, I remember what they are now. These are particles that travel faster than the speed of light. I think that's what they are. I think they emerge from some of the mathematics. The bottom line is that in relativity theory, you can't affect. You will do all sorts of weird things to cause and effect. You can't violate cause and effect relationships. And if you allow particles to travel faster than light, then you can undo that. There are lots of interesting things to discuss there, but
so are you saying that we can't interact with tachyons then, or it's like hard to decide?
Can't influence things by sending signals faster than light. So we know that's just we just discussed an example of where that falls apart. Entanglement, right? I make a measurement of an entangled particle. Instantaneously, the other particle is affected, and that's clearly faster than light speed. Now, that's not a tachyon, but so it looks like you're violating a basic principle of relativity. You can show that you're at least not going to violate cause and effect, So that's okay. That still stands in relativity. Otherwise, physics sort of unravels. But there's a weird faster than light kind of effect there.
And so that's where like the theory of tachyons comes from.
No. Tachyons is something that's specific to relativity. It's not a.
Okay.
I haven't thought about this. I haven't read about them. I never really thought about tachyons.
Okay.
To be honest, but it's been a while.
Well, those I was going to say when you were talking about the possible or impossibility of essentially going beyond the speed of light. That sounds like a Zeus rule. Something Zeus made up and said, "You guys can't do this."
Yeah.
That's like his personality. So I think we'll have to blame him for that one. I've got another question here. One from Shane Duncan. I think he must have asked it earlier in the chat. He keeps hearing people say that the fourth dimension is time. He understands that dimensions are special as opposed to temporal, or spatial as opposed to temporal.
That's a good question.
Can you clarify any of that?
Yeah, space is definitely not time, and vice versa, as the question points out. But in the theory of relativity, in order to keep the speed of light constant, you have to play around with space and time, and so space and time are connected. And they're connected in a very precise mathematical way, right? The faster you're moving through space, the less, in some sense, you're moving through time, the slower time passes for you, and vice versa, right? So that the speed of light remains a constant. And so in around 1910 or something like that, a few years after the special relativity was published, a mathematician combined them together and said, we need to take this relationship between space and time that ensures the constancy of the speed of light more seriously and call it space-time. And in space-time, you have 3 spatial dimensions and 1 of time. And so people talk about 4-dimensional space-time. But not that space and time are the same thing.
All right. Well, I had another question, but it looks like it got answered in the comments itself. Pastor John wanted to know if you were theist or atheist.
Again, as I said at the beginning, before we were on, I don't like labels. So give me your idea, right? So we can talk about scientific ideas. Obviously, we can talk about religious ideas, and there are many different kinds of religious ideas. So if you ask me about specific religions, then I would say, well, is your religious idea making claims about the state of the world and the nature of reality? Does it predict things? Then it's behaving like a scientific idea. It can be falsified, right? So you can sort of find bad religious ideas in that way that act like science. And so maybe you could say, well, there are better religious ideas, right? They're not all they're on a spectrum in some sense, right? So you can say, well, I don't believe in specific doctrines that make all of these specific claims about the nature of certain individuals, deities, and so on. But there's something at the heart of the universe that's mysterious and that kind of acts like a mind and knows something, right? That's less falsifiable. You have to give me a more precise statement. We start to run into a problem that I see there, which is that in order to make it less falsifiable, less acting like science, you start to make fewer claims, more abstract claims. And for an idea to be good, it needs to make, in my mind, specific or precise claims. Maybe not specific, but precise claims about the nature of reality. And so I see some tension there. But I can sort of identify, so give me your religious idea, and what I would automatically do in my mind is put it on this spectrum, right? So I don't think I would say that I'm impressed by certain religious ideas, but there's a difference between them that we can discuss, but not all.
Here's a clarifier.
Essentially, let's just discuss every matter individually.
Yeah, your claim, there are many different kinds of claims. Let's discuss what it is that you're claiming.
Sure. And I'm not forcing the question, but I think maybe a clarifying question would just be, do you practice? And I'm, feel free to not answer the question, but is there a religion that you practice in your week-to-week life?
Is there what that I practice?
A religion.
No.
Okay. And I think that gets more, honestly, that gets more to the heart of when I ask a question like that, like, are you an atheist? Are you a theist? I know that for us on like the TART thing, we talk about it so often, like we just use that word willy-nilly.
Practical use. And nobody would really claim that they know anything for sure, right?
Right. And so I guess it's a useful label in terms of for Christian apologists, they would automatically, if you say that you don't practice a religion, they'd give you some labels, if you don't claim them. So that those are my 2 cents on that.
All right.
Sure, that's fine.
And I've got one more question that I'd like to field about black holes, and then we'll be done with the Q&A. Another one from... Oh, sure. Do you want to field it after this one, Cease?
Yeah, we're gonna move on to Cease after, whenever. But yeah, after this segment or whatever you guys feel, we can throw that in there. But I definitely want to make sure we get Cease in there.
So Shane Duncan would like to know when it comes to gravity, and I think he's referring to the black holes. This was during that part of the discussion. Would it be exponential gravity? One thing affects the other, continued to the local effect?
No, you can't appeal to gravity to explain these connections.
Okay.
The gravity of the black hole is completely irrelevant to the galaxies. The black hole's sphere of influence is so small compared to the size of the galaxy that almost everything in the galaxy is unaware of that gravity, doesn't feel it. It feels other gravity. And that other gravity cannot be, you don't see correlations between the gravity of the stars nearby and the motions of those stars that are connected to the mass of the black hole. The tight connection is between these stars, the motions of these stars that are too far away from the black hole to feel its gravity, and the mass of the black hole. So it's not gravity that you should be appealing to. Perhaps it's something that's coming out of these regions near black holes. So if you look at galaxies, some fraction of these galaxies are extremely bright, and we think there's stuff falling into black holes, and this energy might be affecting the galaxy. And the stuff it's extremely hot, and when stuff is falling in, you basically see the bright central region of this disk-like stuff that's falling into the black holes. It's extremely hot, and it can overshadow the entire galaxy, all the stars in the galaxy. And sometimes you see these powerful jets of energy coming out from the centers of these galaxies. So for some reason, stuff falling into these centers where we think there are huge black holes sometimes produces jets. And the question is, why do only a certain fraction of these energetic galaxies produce jets and others instead just have this hot material swirling around? That's another fundamental question. Perhaps it's the jet energy that comes out that affects the galaxy and ultimately the stars. We haven't found a way to really make this work. But not the
that was fantastic. Thank you so much for answering all those questions.
Sure.
I think we're ready to move on to Cease to Know.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll get Cease to come in and talk, and then some theists are going to pop in at some point. We can have a conversation with that. But yeah, take it away.
And guys, feel free to get to know each other a little bit before you start getting into the questions. We don't want you to go in totally dry or anything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Exactly.
We only know each other for what 30 years now.
30 years.
I gotta come visit you in Georgia sometime soon.
Yeah.
But what was I gonna say? Okay, so I want to bring it back to more of a philosophy and religion perspective. The first question I have is, how would you reply to someone that would make the claim that what you said about superpositions is violating the law of identity? That what science suggests seems to be logical. I'm not making the claim, but how would you reply to that?
Violating logical consistency?
Yeah, so that something can't be and not be.
Something can't have multiple incompatible properties.
But so are you saying that?
No, I'm asking you what you mean by that. I'm asking you if that's what you mean.
So and would that and would different places in space would that not count as incompatible?
Yes.
Because how can one thing be in multiple places?
That's right. It doesn't make any sense. I agree with that. I agree with the person who pointed that out. It doesn't make any sense, right? So the Copenhagen interpretation says some things that seem not to make sense.
Okay. So you do reject that approach.
Well, give me something, give me a way to interpret this that doesn't violate logic.
Right.
I would say that.
Right.
I have not yet. I'm not studying this. I have not understood people who hold to this view, what they mean by the superposition state. I don't understand what that means. If you interpret that or view that from the perspective of a different quantum theory, there's nothing strange about superposition at all. You're not violating your logic.
And so how does it get resolved?
In the many worlds, you don't have one particle in many different places. You have as many particles as there are different states, different positions in the superposition. Right? What do you do when you have a water wave? Well, we discussed a water wave. Two rocks dropping two rocks on a pond. How do you get the interference? Well, it's particles of water coming together.
The crests or the troughs.
Right. They're made of particles, right? And so it's not one particle that produces the interference pattern. It's multiple particles. And there they are in the in the superposition. It's just wave theory as in any other branch of physics. That's what the many worlds people are saying. You don't need to do anything else. So double slit experiments, which in some sense you can think all of quantum physics is just double slit type of experiments, right? They force you into the superposition. It's just making contact, finding a situation where now you have experimental evidence for multiple particles. But you launched one particle. And so we can go into the details of the double slit experiment. Right? If you launch one particle through the double slit, through two slits, what happens? It hits the screen somewhere. And you keep doing that, but it's always one particle that goes through there. You'll eventually see the interference pattern. But interference patterns are the result of multiple particles going through slits. So the conclusion, according to the many worlders, is that although you launched one particle through the slit, there's another particle as well that's going through the slit. And that's your twin particle. And there's no surprise that it's mathematically described in the superposition. Right? You just have multiple worlds, and they haven't decohered. So they're all very similar, except in the positions of a few particles. Right. So, according to many worlders, the idea that there's this one universe and ultimately, one version of ourselves is not correct. There are many worlds and many versions of ourselves. There's a much greater reality there, and there's experimental evidence for it. It's straightforward and direct, these people would say.
My next question is, you sort of touched upon it a little earlier, but I want to get some clarification. Because from a philosophy perspective, when I think of the word existence, I immediately think of existence within space and time. And when I hear religious people make the claim, God exists outside of space and time, I always cringe because conceptually I think you're not actually saying anything linguistically. But now it sounds like you're saying something along the lines of so for example, if space and time are a result of the Big Bang, well, what does it mean to say that a singularity existed before space and time? What linguistic sense does any of that make?
Okay, so you gave me a number of different things, but in terms of questions that involve before after type of questions, I think they kind of assume a picture of what time is.
Right.
But as I mentioned previously, right, physics is moving away from this idea that space and time are these fundamental entities, and that there's something more fundamental that then gives way to space and time. So our space-time matter description of the universe emerges from something that's more fundamental. And so these questions, so I guess maybe the interesting thing is that if you want to talk about God, shouldn't you assume, isn't the assumption that God is at the most fundamental level, is an entity that's at the most fundamental level? And if that's so, why is God then concerned with space and time? God should be concerned with whatever is deeper. So the conversation there sort of isn't getting at what's important or fundamental.
Are you saying that the more fundamental properties then would be outside of space and time then, or is it's like underneath or within?
Well, space and time would emerge. It's not so. Your language suggests that you're assuming space and time are fundamental, and that we have to move, either within space and time or outside of it. But it still has this intuition that they're fundamental entities.
And so is that what you mean then by entanglement, or is that like a separate issue altogether?
So entanglement, some people think it has potential to give us space from quantum mechanical ideas. Degrees of entanglement would give us space. That's the hope. And they're trying to find that correlation in the mathematics.
I guess my issue is that I don't understand what outside space and time even means. Like, I don't know what that could possibly refer to.
Neither do I. But my point is that this would not be a useful question. It wouldn't be dealing with. I don't know if it wouldn't be a useful question, but it wouldn't be a question. It wouldn't be a question that's dealing with fundamental entities. If you want to deal with fundamental entities, if these scientific ideas are ultimately correct, right? If space and time are not fundamental, then it's suggesting that kind of discussion is not getting at fundamental entities, right?
Okay. I think that makes sense. I think if there was any. Oh yeah. I have one last question. What would you say to those who?
So sorry, just to connect to what you were saying, right? So maybe you could say to a religious person who connects God to space and time, connect your notion of God to some notion from which space and time can emerge.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I guess I don't know. I think there's some philosophical problems with language for me, and I'm not sure how to navigate that. Because I think I understand what you're saying, but I don't know. I'm unsure as to where sort of the concept of existence fits into this whole picture and how it relates to this.
Ultimately, that's a word. I mean, you could. How do you define existence? Something being at a certain place at a given moment in time.
Right. That's how I always thought of it, and so.
But that concept, if these entities that you need to describe that go into that definition are not fundamental, then if you want to talk about fundamental quantities, you need to replace that It's something else.
Right. Yeah. So I guess my last question was, how would you reply to a theist who makes the claim that when we observe order, when we observe organized systems, that there's always intent there, and so from that you can infer that when we observe order in the universe, that suggests a God put that order in place.
So when you talk about intent, that suggests to me cause and effect relationships, right?
Right.
What does it mean to have intention if something isn't caused by something else, right? If I'm using my words correctly. If you look at physics, and so this is where some of the strangeness of time emerges even before you get to the theory of relativity. Right? To make the story very, very short, right? So this is one of the things that Sean Carroll sort of uses to describe this. It's not that cause and effect is a nice way to describe relationships between things that fundamentally are just there. So, the number line, the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and so on, they exist on the number line. They all exist there in the same way. It's not, even though you could say 1 + 2 = 3, right? That kind of structure, that the structure of addition isn't fundamental, right? Even though 1 + 2 gives you 3, 1, 2, and 3, they're all just there on the number line. They're not moving. They don't care whether you did the operation. 1 + 2 = 3. They live there independently. Not one isn't caused by the other. We should think of the events in the universe in exactly the same way. Right? So all of the events in space-time, things that are happening at one point in space at some moment in time, should all be thought of as separate kinds of entities. But if you want to look at causation, you can see that causation there. But so this is actually very interesting because it's not a very difficult thing to see. The fact that the speed of light is a constant allows you to play a game with a simple diagram showing that cause and effect relationships are always obeyed. So you can have that conversation. This causes this. I throw the ball to you. You catch the ball at a later time. We can see that on the space-time diagram. But what you have to conclude as a result of the speed of light being constant is that all of these events are really out there sort of independently. And cause and effect is really not a fundamental kind of thing.
Last question for you. What would you say to a theist who makes the claim that it takes more faith to believe in this sort of strange, counterintuitive concepts that it does to believe in something like God or Jesus resurrecting or all that? Okay, so let's just connect to some of the weird things that we've said tonight, right? The many worlds interpretation. Right? So somebody says, there are many versions of yourself. There may be perhaps an infinite number of versions of yourself, and but somehow you feel that there's only one version of yourself. Where do these seemingly absurd ideas come from? Right? So we sort of touched on this a little bit, but they're always connected in a very precise sense to the mathematics. You're trying to make sense of this math, and you want to make sure that your explanation is logically coherent, simple, but ultimately obeys the math that seems to be forced upon you from the experiments. Right? So it's hard to notice that if you're not a physicist, you don't go deep into the math, and you don't see how things are connected and how seemingly absurd things emerge from precise mathematical relationships. And we sort of touched on this here, but that's the conversation that you would have to have. And so it's not really fair to say that a theory in physics isn't just some random idea, between two friends that are drinking. They're attempts to make sense of mathematical structures that are supported by experimental evidence. Yeah, and there are places where that sort of falls apart.
Sorry, and then you can say, well, maybe you're in the speculative. Maybe there's some math that people want to use. It doesn't ultimately work out, and then people try to interpret it before they realize it doesn't make any sense and it wasn't right in the first place.
Right.
That's the kind of thing.
And
Sorry.
I'll just add. Obviously, the main difference is that it actually has predictive and explanatory power, and what results from the science are concrete things that we can point to, where we're not just making assumptions and choosing one over any other explanation that it could be. All our medicine and technology and all the things are actually based on the science that some might view as absurd without understanding the context.
Well, your idea, your scientific idea has to have the potential to be tested. It has to have the potential to make predictions.
Right.
And there are some ideas that people want to claim as science that it's not clear whether they have that feature.
They don't offer any future testable predictions, essentially.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, guys, I appreciate that conversation. We're gonna add some people into the mix. David, I want to respect your time. I want to respect everybody's time. That's on the board here. So if we can,
Sure.
Perhaps we'll go into a little bit of a discussion, and maybe we can get some theists to ask some questions, so it's not just a bunch of atheists asking you questions. And maybe we can dive in from there. We'll have Steve kind of mod. I'll pop in as well if I feel like a word isn't being defined. This isn't a debate, obviously, just a conversation. But I feel like if you're talking past each other or people start getting argumentative, we're gonna come in and let people know that this is a calm discussion. No pun intended. This is a kalam discussion. Ha ha ha. Yeah, see what I did there? Anyway. So when we could get into all that, but we got is that Pastor John? Oh man, this is gonna turn into a crap show real quick.
Pastor John has joined the chat.
Pastor John's a good friend of ours. I talked to him. We can't hear him because he's muted.
No, that's fine. Keep him muted.
I talked to him a good bit. He's a good guy. So yeah, John, if you want to start off asking some questions or
yeah.
Connie.
Yeah, why not? Hi, first off, I only see myself right now. Is that normal?
What's not normal is how bad you are lagging right now. That's not normal.
I'm lagging?
Yeah, you're like in 2007 still.
That's so strange. Okay. Is it just my voice or my video?
How is Black Ops 2? Is it good? Where you're at?
Is it my audio or my video?
You're not lagging on my end, so
it's probably good now.
Okay, great.
It's probably just my
I'm
end.
hearing you fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
So yeah, I was just kind of invited on to talk with you, David. I've been listening, not taking any notes, therefore not going to remember anything you have really said, to be quite honest, because we've been talking about some deep stuff. But in thinking about while I've been sitting here kind of playing with my daughter on what I could ask you, I thought of one of my favorite quotes that one of my favorite apologists actually liked to use. His name was Ravi Zacharias. Are you familiar with him?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, so when he's asked scientific questions having to do with why God probably doesn't exist, right? Obviously, I'm the theist. I don't know if they introduced me as that or not. But so I like to use this quote, and I would like to hear your thoughts on it. Are you familiar with a man named David Berlinski?
Yes.
Okay. What do you think of him just in general? I mean, starting out, I haven't done a whole lot of research on the scientific side of things. Within people.
What I know about him is that he has some ideas about evolution being wrong, and he's an intelligent designer.
Gotcha. So this is his quote, and I would just like to hear your thoughts on it. It's from his book known as The Devil Delusion. Are you familiar?
No.
Okay, so
I know
here's
about
what
his math book. He wrote a math book on calculus.
I was kicked out of 8 schools And that's not an exaggeration. So here's the quote. Has anyone provided proof of God's inexistence? Not even close. Has quantum cosmology explained the emergence of the universe or why it is here? Not even close. Have our sciences explained why our universe seems to be fine-tuned to allow for the existence of life? Not even close. Are physicists and biologists willing to believe in anything so long as it is not of religious thought? Close enough. Has rationalism and moral thought provided us with an understanding of what is good, what is right, and what is moral? Not close enough. Has secularism in the terrible 20th century been a force for good? Not even close to being close. Is there a narrow and oppressive orthodoxy in sciences? Close enough. Does anything in sciences or the philosophy justify the claim that the religious belief is irrational? Not even in the ballpark. Is scientific atheism a frivolous exercise in intellectual contempt? Dead on.
You gave me a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, so there's a ton there, but I mean,
A lot of them are very different from each other. So
yeah, absolutely. So
All wrong, by the way.
say what?
All wrong, by the way. But I'll let
Okay.
him. I'll let him respond. Maybe I'll
Okay,
jump on
so
later.
So yeah, how about that? Do you think, let's just address that statement right there. Do you think that is all wrong, by the way?
well, let's go through them because I actually agree with some of those comments, right? So he said something about science.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want,
You
I
have to
can.
remind
guys.
me.
Why don't
So at some
Pastor
point
John? Why don't
you're mixing science with scientists, with the individuals, and there are all sorts of individuals within science that do certain things that you can question, right? That are not legitimate from a scientific perspective. There's nothing strange there, right?
Yeah.
But why would you conflate what individuals do with the idea of science, right?
Gotcha.
So if there are scientists that invent things or propose bad ideas, right? I complain about this all the time, right? So I have a theoretical framework that I try to apply to data, and I get frustrated when I see people who review my papers or who write other papers that discuss some of my work, and they say things about it that is not capturing what it is that my ideas are saying.
Gotcha.
Right. So it's not that, the scientific process involves people, and people are all over the place, right? It's not that they behave. There's no such thing as the perfect behavior of a scientist, right? In fact, the scientific method is just some ideal thing. So what are we doing in science? Well, we're having a conversation. I'll put a paper out, and you'll try to knock it down, and I'll notice that you didn't understand what I was saying, and in some other places you did understand, and you gave me a good criticism, and so on. But sometimes we speak past each other. It's not like, scientists come up with perfect objections, right? Or they support a theory because they notice that the data is supporting that theory. No, sometimes they support a theory because of the individuals that they want to fit in with, right? So these are human beings. So sometimes I hear these criticisms about people, scientists, and that's perfectly fine. But that doesn't mean that there's a problem with science, right? That just means that we need to do better when we're dealing with the scientific ideas, right? No scientific idea emerges from people inventing explanations to data. Right? Eventually, the things will come out. It take longer or less, but there's no perfect scientific method that, there's this ideal that maybe some people who haven't studied science or haven't done science think is the way science works. It's not like I see something and I say, okay, let's change our theory a little bit, and everyone says, yes, That's exactly right. That's the way it should be. I'll see something and I'll try to explain it, and most of the people that read it didn't pay attention to what I was saying because they thought that someone else has a better idea and they didn't bother to read what I was saying. But these are people. So that's one thing.
Did that kind of answer your overall question, John? Or did you want to kind of go through?
That was just one specific part, right?
That dealt with a little part of it. But I mean, I understand for the sake of time, we can't necessarily go into absolutely everything that quote goes into. I guess David Berlinski's overall point is saying that how should I word this? I guess David Berlinski's overall point, if I were to sum up that statement, it's more so going to be along the lines of, to say that a God is not a possibility would be intellectually dishonest. I mean, is that...
But no one would disagree with it.
Well, not necessarily even a possibility, but go ahead. I'm sorry.
Hey, Sean.
You can't rule out all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't think that's the conversation that you want to have. You don't want a trophy because you noticed that someone couldn't disprove some idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely not.
You want to produce an idea that is good.
Yeah, we want to. Yeah, I was just going to say we want to have truth. That's the pursuit of all of this, the pursuit of all sciences, the pursuit of all religion, the pursuit of all philosophy. It's about the exact same thing that Jesus said to Pontius Pilate when he said, "What is truth?" And man is trying to look for truth ever since, and long before. So
John, then what becomes the question, right? What is the best pathway to finding that truth? The truth.
What is the best pathway?
To finding truth.
Truth about what? So
anything. What's the best method?
I think it depends on what you're actually looking for.
Reliability. What's the most reliable method?
Are you
for finding truth?
Are you talking about truth of God, or are you just talking about truth about anything?
Basically, just anything
that's true.
Well, I mean, I'm not really.
Is there a methodology
what I'm really trying not to do is put myself in a box to where I know, because I understand why you're asking your question. That's really the big thing, and why I'm hesitant to answer.
How murderous.
Yeah, like I said, if I was just invited on here to have a discussion, I'm good with it. But
sure. No,
like I said, I know your motivation, Steve. So that's why I'm kind of hesitant.
Cistino, I want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, but just be honest and answer the question, right?
John,
what's your feeling about that?
When you discussed how science is latching on to anything that seems to go against God or try to disprove God. Science is open to whatever is reasonable to believe. It's not trying to disprove anything. I could list you a million things that you couldn't disprove, but would have no reason to believe. You claim that religion is concerned with truth the same way that all other methods are, or all other fields are. But I would reply with that we're following very different methods, and a lot of what results in religious beliefs use a method that I think is not concerned with truth. It's concerned with something else. And I think there's a difference there. I don't think that this picture that the science is just out to, attack religion just for fun or as a bias. I think
no. Yeah, and I never was making that claim. Like
But that quote is.
Not necessarily. When you're looking at why he wrote the book, right? The Devil's Delusion is written in response to the book that Richard Dawkins wrote called The God Delusion.
Sure.
So in The God Delusion, Richard Dawkins is making a lot of scientific claims to back up why God more probably does not exist. So what Berlinski comes in and does is he writes a book in response to the God delusion. He's not making overall general statements. He's responding to very specific claims in another book.
Oh no, I'm aware. I understand that.
Yeah.
I agree with you.
So when he's going into those things, and I think that's in the very beginning of the book. I could be wrong. When he's going into those very specific things, he is addressing a lot of what Richard Dawkins is putting forth as claims, right?
Sure.
So that, yeah, it's.
But he, I guess, I mean, and I'll leave it there because I don't want to take up too much of the conversation. But I'll just say, I read the book.
Yeah.
Like I'm aware of what the context is, but what I'm saying is that his depiction of what science is doing, as well as its role in, one of the points you mentioned is morality in the 21st century. I think it's completely off the mark historically, and I think it's off the mark, in how he's responding to Dawkins' points about science.
Yeah, now I agree that is more of a philosophical statement that he makes in that. I 100% concede that statement where he talks about morality, it's not necessarily a, oh gosh, it is a party now. What's up, Mark?
Christ,
one
the second
second.
coming of Christ has arrived. Shabuba.
One second, guys. Mark, I need you to turn down whatever that is because it's echoing in the back.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that we are aware that there are scientists who find no tension between pursuing their science and having their faith, right?
Are you talking to me?
So, no, I'm just pointing out to everyone because we seem to be having a conversation, I guess to pass to John, but that all of science or scientists seem to have this view. They're on a spectrum, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we could discuss what they're doing in not finding tension. That they're sort of appealing to a definition of science.
Roof Skywalker. Sorry.
My name's Sean. That's just my.
Yeah, I was just going to ask how you wanted to be addressed. Did you want to be addressed as Sean?
I just wanted to say hi to everybody. I thought Pasta Mike was going to be on here. He hasn't talked to me for like 2 or 3 weeks, so I just want to say up if you're back there somewhere, Chief.
Sean.
All right.
Anyway,
I was just
you.
wondering if you had anything to interject or anything like that.
Like, I feel like I'm in 9th grade and I'm going to like butt out and go smoke a cigarette in the bathroom because I'm. Anyway, yeah, I just, I don't know. I was curious, I guess. I don't even know what you guys are talking about other than what you just said about Berlinski or whatever. So, but, Connor.
Fair enough. Well, sorry for putting you on the spot in front of the class. What about Connor?
Oh, it's.
So you're gonna put me on the spot in front of the class?
Yeah.
So what's the question?
Yeah. Do you have anything to interject? Anything to add, or any kind of questions?
Sorry, what's that?
Do you have any questions?
Not that I can think of, but I would like to say hi to Shawnee and Mark. I've never spoken to them verbally before, so.
Connor.
John, mute yourself, friend. Connor can address whoever he feels. Okay.
Also, Ben, I have not spoken to you either, so.
He's never spoken to me verbally either.
Yes, I have. John, did John say that?
Yeah, we've never had a conversation like.
I'm gonna rope this back in.
I was
Discord.
gonna say let's get to more questions.
So potentially, I know Mark, you had some questions in the comments earlier. Did you want to ask David about those perhaps and have a dialogue there for just between all of us or whatever?
Oh my gosh.
So I shot in the one about quantum entanglement and how far two particles can be apart and still be entangled, just as a curiosity because I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know if that was answered in the Q&A part, but I guess I had one more question. Everything has like sort of gravitational pull to everything else in the universe. You have that I think it's the Buddhist idea of the Indra's net, where like everything is interconnected and almost like a spider web lattice or whatever. Do you think that there's any evidence in like historical texts or religious texts that that show that there was a possibility that these people writing this had some sort of knowledge of quantum mechanics or any kind of ideas in physics before we narrowed it down with science? Do you think there's any relation there to what they were discovering, maybe by some other means, and what we know now with the instruments we have?
Well, I'm not a religious scholar, so I haven't looked at any such texts, but it would seem very strange that you could get knowledge about this kind of behavior in nature without doing these experiments, because this shows up in a very specific context, right? You have to have the technology to isolate a system, a very small system, and play around with it enough to realize that nature fundamentally isn't classical. It does these extremely weird things, right? Well, I can't imagine how you would get that knowledge somewhere else.
What I've found with
unless you're talking about revelation, right?
Right.
Well, so that's one interesting question. Where are all the revelations about things that people didn't know of when they got the revelations?
Yeah, exactly.
You would expect to see a lot of stuff there that you can't get by any other means.
Yeah. And so I guess I preoccupied myself with this idea that if we could build a bridge between science, like secular ideas, and theists, right, find this common ground, I think that's the major issue we have with the battle between someone who believes in God or spiritual forces and someone who doesn't necessarily, or either like abstains from believing or doesn't believe at all. There's that disconnect, obviously, right? We have these.
There are plenty of scientists that have no problem there.
That's why I explicitly said
there are those in biology.
The people that are secular,
right, and have that. Yeah. I mean, what are they doing? You have to look at what they're doing, but again, I presume that when you look at more deeply at how they explain the lack of tension there, they're doing things like, okay, science is a very specific kind of endeavor. It's ideas that make predictions and can be falsified, right? So if religion is not in the business of making predictions, and you're not looking at data, right? Then to support your religious idea, then you're not in the business of science. You're not trying to falsify or look for support for your idea, because that's a scientific approach.
Yeah. I would say you'd have to. That's kind of the disconnect that I think is that, like, you can bridge those gaps, but the person that's not bridging the gap is typically the person with the religious ideals, because typically they want to kind of beat around that bush of the rigorous process that we go through, which is testing something, making future predictions, and then being able to falsify it. It doesn't appear that a lot of those ideas want to offer themselves up for falsification.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. We live in a society where there's so much distrust of science, and this. It's a very rigorous process. But there are all sorts and there's basically common sense. I think that most of what we do is just science. You want to find out whether or not your keys are in the drawer. You open the drawer to see if there's the evidence of the keys, right? These are scientific processes. And scientists don't do anything that's much different from that, except they use instruments to be able to see the very small and the very large, right? Things that are very far away. Sorry, I see a question there you're posting.
Well, and
the producer's confusing you.
Shabuba, there's something that I kind of noticed, because I've definitely followed along a lot of very similar lines as you, as far as tying quantum physics or quantum mechanics into what would be the spiritual realm, right?
Yeah.
So what I found typically is that you have a lot of indigenous beliefs that are tied to observations within the natural world, right? And those beliefs are then created with some supernatural elements. And most of the quantum mechanics comes in as kind of a post hoc rationalization, where you would say, okay, so now this is proving what we've been saying this whole time, but it's only really because the concepts themselves were vague to begin with. Like within Lakota spirituality, they called Tunkasha Lawankantanka, which is translated to the great mystery. That's all the authority that they're appealing to. So
Yeah,
they really aren't even asserting anything.
Yeah, it highlights what I was talking. I think me and Mark were kind of talking about briefly the last shows. It highlights the underdetermination principle, where you can take a single piece of evidence, or even multiple pieces of evidence, and you can have a thousand rival theories. But if one of them makes future predictions and it doesn't fail at that, and then it also is like, here's how you would falsify this. Scientists and maybe David could help me out here, but from the perspective of my understanding is that they offer these ideas and these hypotheses to be beaten up. Like they want you to beat the crap out of these things, and then if you can't beat the crap out of it, you're like, oh well, maybe we got something here. With that, I mean, David, would you say that that's an accurate way to kind of put that?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of people have this idea of science as a kind of club where everyone comes in and says, what is it that I'm supposed to believe in? Right? But scientists are supposed to challenge each other. Now, that doesn't mean, again, scientists are people. So you'll see people supporting the ideas of others when they don't have good reason to support them.
i.e. intelligent design.
Okay. But, it's, I'm always fighting with people. I'm not spending my time, praising others or getting praise from people. And I don't remember the last time I got a referee report that didn't attack me almost personally. I've gotten referee reports. Now it's a little bit less. I've gotten referee reports from big journals saying, you're stealing ideas. Where are you getting this from? I have to reply to the referees, what is it that I'm stealing? Show me what I'm stealing. Why did you bother refereeing this report if all you wanted to do was knock it down? At least think about it a little bit, knock it down with something a little bit more reasonable. So we're fighting. It's not that there's this consensus, right? And all of that is hidden because science has a terrible PR problem, right? People aren't aware of the constant fighting that's going on. So they think there's this strange consensus. And that's unfair because it's not the way science works.
I want to add something sort of in response to what Mark said real quick. A lot of these ideas that, the scientific knowledge came through prophecy way before we had the tools to discover them. From my readings of these things, they're always incredibly vague and are sort of reframed to fit the current scientific understanding of things afterwards. It's not that there was this clear, sort of predictive things in way before we had the tools of science.
Sorry, I just wanted to add. But why would you connect? I mean, I'm not sure what people who have these kinds of views are saying, but there's no sense in which you can take a sentence or two from a religious text, for that matter, from any text, and claim that that's the same kind of thing as a theory that has a mathematical structure, its solutions and predictions that follow from that you can test. It's a completely different kind of intellectual exercise. So
the idea of that is from, like, just to give you context of where it's coming from, is the idea of biblical prophecy, right? That's really it's a supernatural element is kind of what he's going into, is how that there is.
Can't hear you, John.
Can't hear me?
Hey guys, at one point I'd like to actually tell you what I meant.
I can hear him.
All right.
Can't hear me,
guys. Hold on. We could hear Pastor John. Let's
okay.
I don't know.
Yeah, let's do Pastor John.
No, I was just giving David context. Like I said, it's from a religious belief, right, or a theistic or deistic or whatever you want to talk about belief. The idea within holy text is that is presented. I probably presented arguments myself regarding these things, but I would not say I have absolute 100% confidence that these are talking about scientific discoveries. But the idea is that in these holy texts, because God is the creator of everything, that within these holy texts, you have scientific properties that are represented through prophecy, so that when they are discovered later on in modern times, that it lends supernatural credibility to the prophecies in the holy book. Does that make sense?
Sure, but you're not saying that the
Yeah.
details of science emerge from these texts, right?
No, I mean, we would say they emerge from the creator, not necessarily the text.
So I'd love to get my take on this, because I get the point I was making isn't that I'm so a little context on me is I don't think the Holy Bible is a book given by God. I think the Holy Bible is a thousands and thousands of year span of law, philosophy, poetry, attempts at science in its juvenile form, brought together. There was like 600 books that didn't make it. This is an amalgamation of writers. Not all of them were Christian. Not all of them believed in the same type of Christianity. These are different writers, right? And you bring all that stuff together. The point I'm making, I guess, is that, for instance, we take a phrase like, in the beginning, God spoke the word and the word became flesh. I can see that as, frequency, like became particle, right? It's not that I'm not saying, oh, look, the Bible already said it. What I'm saying is, if we can interlink these ideas and make science more accessible to religious people without them having to abandon their belief in deity, we can have better conversations. Science becomes more accessible. And then science can also appreciate possible accomplishments in the Bible, because we're taking too many of the stories literal. And we need to understand that some of them are figurative and metaphoric for higher philosophical and scientific concepts.
How do we determine which ones are metaphoric and allegorical?
Well, by going back one to I explained to Mike last time, like he said, Adam and Eve goes against evolution. I said, well, not if you understand the Hebrew translation of that story. And that is, Adam is Adamu, which means mankind. Eve is Chawa, which means life. And so the proper translation of that story is man was tempted by life. And the idea.
Well, it's worse than that. It's also cosmology. It's pretty much everything that it doesn't get right. So.
Well, no. It does. You're missing the point, I think, and you're trying to bring other sciences that have nothing to do with it. That was just a philosophical idea about the rise of consciousness. Like it's not super complicated, and because we're mistranslating these things in our modern interpretation, we're missing out on beautiful metaphors.
But how do you know what is the right metaphor when we can apply the same
we
type
don't know. We don't know until we test it. But what's more important is,
how do you test the metaphor?
Yeah, it's not falsifiable either.
It's not I think you guys are really missing the point. This isn't a science project. It's about making the language, hang on. It's about making the language more accessible so we can bring theists into the conversation on secular science and they don't have a bad taste in their mouth. It's important to just open up the dialogue. It's not about who's right and who's wrong. It's about creating a translatable way so that theists and atheists can get on the same page and we can have bigger conversations so that science may be able to appreciate like valuable stuff in the Bible that is being misinterpreted at this point, getting a better interpretation and saying, wow, these things kind of do relate. Maybe we can learn from each other.
I think there's a problem though, because you're viewing like science like it's this thing that like is in this corner of the room, and religion is something that's in this corner of the room. But science is a methodology, and it is the best way to describe everything in the room. So religion doesn't get to like wall away from that. It doesn't get to like, with the bad taste in its mouth. That's not the fault of science that these rigorous.
And Mike, I never said it was. What I'm trying to say is,
let me finish real fast. Is the issue I find, at least, is if you want to bridge that gap, you can't meet in the middle like that, because religion and these ideas have nothing to offer that science. You have to come almost full way with science until you can show me a reason why that methodology would be even reliable in any sense. So I'm not going to meet halfway with something like any type of methodology, faith, or anything that hasn't proved itself, because or metaphorically or anything like that, because it serves until it's proven to me. I'm not going to go with the 1,000 what ifs. Yeah, I'm going to go with the thing that's demonstrable and that is repeatable and is testable. And if religion can't adapt in that environment, then for me it's enough to go, well, I don't think it has anything of value to tell me, and B, it's probably not true.
Well, Mike, that's a tyrannical view I'm sorry to say it, but that's a tyrannical view to have when you say, I won't even come 50% to have a conversation with you so we can understand each other.
No, that's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
You just
That's
said
not-
that you
no,
wouldn't
no,
go
no,
50%.
no, 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 you're
You just said
misunderstanding.
you wouldn't go
Hold on.
50%.
Mark,
Well,
Mark, I
explain
won't.
it better then, because maybe I misunderstood you.
Sure, I will. So what I'm saying is that the methodology has nothing to do with people conversations. It's nothing to do with personalities or feelings. This has to do with the methodologies that are used to get to objective truth. If religion is saying that they have unlocked truth to something, and then when asked and pressed about if whether or not we can falsify these things or if they can test these things, they weasel out of that, and then they want to bridge the gap with science.
You're generalizing.
Hold on. No, that was
You're generalizing all theists as if they're all arrogant and they're all going to refuse you.
That's not what I'm saying.
The case. Well, no, yeah, that's exactly
No,
what I'm saying. And
stop.
just like David said
Mark,
earlier, you
let me
can't
finish.
generalize scientists. You can't generalize theists. You can't.
This doesn't have to do with people.
You are using generalizations about theists.
Mark, we're talking past each other because this has nothing to do. Let's bring it down a little bit because this doesn't need to get heated.
Hey, guys,
I'm not heated. I'm just being curt with you. I mean, it's slippery what you're saying. I'm trying to pin you down right now.
Well, if you let me finish,
you can't generalize all theists as being like these people that don't know what's going on, that refuse to have a conversation. It's not happening. It isn't true.
So you're not steel manning my position properly at all. You're straw manning me. You didn't like if
I didn't
you
don't know what a straw man is either. A straw man is changing your argument into something weaker and then attacking that to make your original argument look bad. I didn't just do that.
So you're talking about theist. I'm not talking about theist. So let's take. That's why I said before you went into
who are you talking about then?
Mark, please let me finish. It'll be very beneficial for the conversation. If we have this idea that there's a methodology involved with the religion, this has nothing to do with the theist. This has to do with the claims that are made about this objective truth of reality. All right. Hold on. I'm not even done yet.
What's the person's belief system that's making the claims about the religion?
It's not the claims about the religion. This is the claims of the origins of life, right? So these are claims about how we came to be, how consciousness. You just literally said that this was a metaphor for how consciousness came to be. And
out of the Bible.
Let me finish.
To those people. Who are the people that believe in the Bible?
Let me finish. Let me finish. This has nothing to do with the theist. The theist could be interpreting the methodology improperly for all I know. So it's nothing to do with them. But when it's offered up to see what this thing can do to offer actual testable predictions that we could use in the realm of getting to truth, it doesn't come anywhere close to giving us any truth. It's all just essentially it's imaginary until it's proven otherwise. And when it wants to meet halfway with science, it's not offering any reason for us to give it. Look, it's this easy. You have a hypothesis, or you say something like, if this religion is true, say this God exists, he will give me a gold brick. Okay. If you ask for the gold brick and the brick doesn't come, yeah, it doesn't say that it's not true, but until you can actually show me something, it's a testable prediction in the future, I have no reason to consider it. But once it does do that, then that's fine. But it's not the fault of me or science or any other person that this methodology fails. It's not our fault.
And that's again, I'm not trying to make the point of trying to prove whether or not the Adam and Eve story is specifically that, or if the word became flesh means, particles in the Big Bang coalescing into matter. What I'm saying is, if you can start there and start building a conversation where maybe we're talking about the same thing, you can have more valuable and enriching conversations with theists where you don't have to just be arguing about God or whether or not it's true or not, but instead say, hey, maybe these things are interrelated. I'm just talking about having a better conversation. I don't think we often do. This idea of Indra's net in Buddhism and the idea of gravity having a pull on everything else in the universe, that should be a conversation we're having because it bridges this gap between the old and the new. And a lot of people who subscribe to those old ways. It's good to have that conversation.
Wouldn't you think we would discover this if this was part of reality? Don't you think we would just discover this? This would be part of the sciences. This wouldn't be something we would just go, no, we don't need this. Why haven't we stumbled upon this if it's true? Because if this is a methodology we use and we come up with and we are getting to truth in almost every facet, if I can talk to you right now because of what science has done to provide me a laptop and a microphone and the airwaves and all these types of things for me to get it to you, don't you think that when we use this methodology that provides these amazing things that we would see what you're saying or what anybody says in that realm? Wouldn't that just come up by itself? Wouldn't we notice that once the flashlight is put on it? Wouldn't we see it?
Well, I don't think you understand what science is built on. I mean, science for a large period of time, the Enlightenment period has
it's my field of study, so I think I do.
Well, no, because the Enlightenment period is built off of the Catholic support of science in Europe. The Catholicism has a part to play in pushing science forward. I mean, geez, they got a giant telescope that's called Lucifer for understanding the cosmos. I think there's you see too thick of a line between what was done with the Bible or the Quran and all that. These aren't books. These aren't just holy books. These are books of their science, of their philosophy, of their history, and we stand on their shoulders because they are giants. Beautiful things. Beautiful philosophies and ideas and scientific principles come out of holy books because history is built upon itself. This is interrelated and interconnected since man started writing.
And I have no problem with scientific things coming from a book. You could have a book that is absolute, like the Bible could be 100% scientifically accurate. It doesn't lend credit in any sense to the things that it's saying. Like if it's saying something that has nothing to do with the claims it's making, and it's like because people use this, it's like, well, how do they know? Jesus would have water come out. Well, we know this because people observed this while this went on. They observed these things. They put that in the book. These kind of observations and having the empirical data is not. It's not like these people didn't know this when they put this in the book. What matters here is the claims that it's saying. If there's things that are true in the book, that's fine. If there's good stories in the book, that's fine. If there's good philosophy in the book, that's fine. But I'm in the business of caring about what's objectively true and limiting myself to believing in false things. And if it's not objectively true and it's this whole subjective thing, we're in this like weird realm where I don't think we agree because we're talking past each other, because I believe there is an objective truth and you can't pick apart and do this whole perennial philosophy thing. I don't think you can do that. It doesn't give you any noetic experience. It doesn't. It doesn't provide you anything like that.
I'm curious to see how David would reply to this claim that science sort of standing on the shoulders of religion in that way, that the two are much more in relationship.
Well, in the practical sense, there's just no other structure. That was the structure in which science was able to operate. It's very much connected to religion. But I'm not sure that's.
Well, what's interesting.
I don't think you would say that the scientific ideas are emerging from religion. Right? That's not the connection that you want to make, right?
Well, science has a lot to thank to Christian. I'm not saying religion is the reason science exists, although it's interesting. The empirical method was basically imagined out of Descartes' mind after he had a dream when an angel came to him and said, "The world will be conquered with measure and number." So that's always fascinating, ironic to look back on.
No, that's fine. I mean, I'd be happy to concede that to you if it were true. If out of religion emerged ideas about science, I'd be happy to grant that to you. But I'm not sure that my point is that science is a kind of process, right? And the ideas of science emerge from that process. The conclusions, the theories of science emerge from that process. Whether science came from or owes anything,
it does
to whatever it does, that's fine.
Yeah, and it does. Mark is right. It does owe things to think, because when science came out of the ashes of it, it was the first time we could go, okay, this stuff does not add up. This stuff is probably not true. So it does have everything to thank, because it actually provided a process in which we demonstrably determine things to be true, rather than just listening to what people said in the past.
Yeah, but I want to add, many scientific ideas emerged in the context of religion, right? If you go back to Islam, you'll see the same kinds of things. But if you look at Copernicus and the astronomy of the 1500s and afterwards, a lot of their data it comes from what religious scholars were doing, which was both religion and science.
But the mistake here is to assume that there's a connection between the two things. Like, just because someone is part of a culture and they have a religious understanding of the world, doesn't mean that when they're applying science, that now they're doing both. People can compartmentalize. So I have no problem with the idea there's been religious scientists, but that doesn't mean that there's a connection between the two methods. And this sort of this attempt, and actually, I think David Gonzalez, I think from my understanding of your views and your videos, you make this claim a lot, that religion is itself a rational attempt to uncover truth. I think it's misguided. I think it's confusing the methodology. I don't think that the things are as much in relationship as I think.
Well, so you don't think there was a rational pursuit for truth before the scientific method?
I think that we had a drive to want to understand truth, but I don't think the method of that, at least as far as I understand it, of religion is a method that's reliable, and I don't think that there is a something you can compare to the scientific method in the same way. Like I don't think it's just either two different language games or we're really talking about different things, but they're not in conflict. No, religion is making claims about reality, and it's doing so using a method that I think is flawed and problematic. And I think there's many other factors are at play there that I don't think are as focused, as rigorous, and as caring about rationality and logic and all these things.
Okay, let me ask a question to David, because really kind of what we're hashing out is, to me, what it sounds like it is. Would you say, David, that, and this is more of a fun question, but if you were to put a mathematical probability or percentage on the existence of deity as an answer to the unanswered questions of the universe, what mathematical probability would you put? Would you say 50-50? Like, just to give an example, would you say 50-50 that 50% chance God does exist, 50% chance God doesn't? Or would you say it's a lower percentage or a higher percentage?
Wait, but which God? Because
no, I'm just saying.
Let's say that.
That's a good question.
What percentage would you give that, Neptune is the god of what is it, the sea?
No. I'm not making a claim about a specific God. I'm saying specifically deity, creator of a universe. I don't care what religion. I don't care what walk of life.
Again, what do you mean by that? If you want to give me a specific claim about this deity that has certain characteristics, right? The more you give me practical characteristics that involve intervention, the more you're creating a deity that lends himself or itself to a scientific approach, and then I can explore that. If you give me some kind of notion of deity that involves an intelligence, right, behind everything, I
would say
that's a very different kind of thing, and that's right. So we go back to the notion of what's a good idea. So one idea is worse than the other. Right, so it seems the idea of this encompassing kind of thing is a better idea, also because it doesn't lend itself to falsifiability in the way that the specific creator deity does, like Neptune or Zeus with the lightning bolt and so on.
Yeah, gotcha.
Again, it's always
okay. So just for the sake of conversation, let's just talk my God, Yahweh, right? The God of the Bible. If you were to put a probability on that,
hey John.
Yeah.
Your cognitive bias is showing.
It's just a question.
I'm just kidding.
And like I said, my first statement was just, like I said, it wasn't so much central around a specific deity. I'm fine going there, but it was more so, is there a creator of the universe or is there not? Is there a reason to believe more one way or the other? Like I said, within religion, there's theistic gods, where gods that are interacting with humanity, and then there are deistic gods where it's just a god exists but undiscovered type thing. So, like I said, if you want a specific reference, sure, we can just talk about my God for a second. Oh, where'd he go? Oh, you're over there. Sorry, I was looking.
Turned into Austin.
Yeah, he turned into Oz. I'm like, gosh, darn it. Yeah, go ahead, David. I'm sorry.
Do you find it reasonable to conclude that Zeus is less likely to be associated with truth than Yahweh?
I do, yes.
Okay, so again, I would say pay attention to the specifics, the specific characteristics that you're your deities have, and what you realize is that you're applying a sort of scientific approach to that.
Okay.
Right?
Explain that to me a little bit, so I fully grasp what you're saying.
Your idea becomes better as it distances itself from anything that science can then explore, right? So your Yahweh has characteristics that are not as easily describable as Zeus, right? Zeus does very practical things, right? So by the way, that's evidence that people were using gods to explain the natural world, right?
Gotcha. Yeah.
Right. So we know that lightning bolts are produced by specific kinds of physical processes that suggest that maybe your attempt at a deity is flawed in that, in the sense that it's trying to produce an explanatory something explanatory for the natural processes. But so you're moving away from that kind of thing. You're trying to find a deity that doesn't directly explain natural processes in that way, but is sort of removed from them. So a better explanation would be a creator deity of some kind of intelligence at the heart of everything that instantiates the laws of nature that then we discover when we look at nature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So then maybe a better idea is that if you want to make contact with your deity, you don't look and see Zeus with a lightning bolt or Neptune making the water waves move, right?
Absolutely.
It's a kind of contact that's very different from science. Science, you look out in the physical world, right? So in that sense, you're moving away from the scientific idea.
Yeah. So I think the biggest contention, like
Hey, John.
Yeah.
Real quick. So for just to shrink down, when we got this many people on screen, and I've been watching from the YouTube platform most of the night, and now we've got a lot going on. So I want to shrink it down and simplify the screen and the conversation. I want to say, for those that have been on tonight, even some of the ones that have bounced off, we appreciate it, and we will definitely have anybody and everybody that's been a part of this on again and have you back. But we want to condense this before we wrap up. So if you're on the screen, we'll have you back. But I'm going to start dismissing some of the faces tonight, and we'll have you back on. That way, like I said before we end it, we can have a little more intimate and one-on-one conversation. So I appreciate you guys. And if you disappear, don't take it personally, but we will have you back. I promise. If you're willing,
and I can volunteer my spot if anybody wants to take that. I'm willing to give that away. So.
I do want to.
I feel like I'm standing on a stage right now that a lever's about to be pulled.
Right. Okay, let me say one thing, because in case I probably will drop out. David, again, thank you. If you have any time that you need to go or anything like that, feel free to do that. But we thank you a lot for coming, and
thank you guys.
Everybody said, but thank you guys.
Yeah, and that's what I say before we kind of condense it. David and Edna both, thank you so much for helping us put this together tonight. Great conversations, and we will do this again. I promise you, we will do this again. And Mark, good to see you again, man. And every time I see you, it's God body, then Shuba Booba body, and then Mark body.
You got to give me 10 Hail Shabubas for that.
I'll give you one Hail Shabuba.
but no, appreciate it. And that's what I'm gonna call you, Et. Good to see you, my man, and always appreciate you being on. And we're gonna shrink it down before we end up, because it's getting late. And I appreciate you guys. And we'll talk soon. So I'll start minimizing here. And what we want to do here is make sure that we're down to 4.
It's so much bigger. My face is so much bigger now.
Oh no, David's gone.
And now.
Yeah, I'm right here.
The other. No. Oh, I wasn't done.
And now all of a sudden we actually get to really see how ugly Pastor John really is. No, I'm kidding.
Oh man, I think everyone in the comment section is glad for a change of pace, looking at my face than the Tart Boys.
Well, I would argue that point, but
you'd lose.
But I will tell you, I know for a fact from watching videos on TikTok and shit that David Gonzalez plays the drums and guitar better than you sing. So we got that going on.
Very possibly.
But no, so obviously, John and David, we've had many conversations, whether it's been TikTok, YouTube, those kind of things. But I'm sure you've seen Benji on TikTok. He's grown a popularity there, but officially now, we get to talk with him. I want to make sure that I give a proper introduction, and Ben is part of the TART family now. So we actually have a good looking guy as part of the crew now.
Yeah, I was praying for that to happen. It looks like God answered my prayer. So what now, atheist?
I resent that statement, sir.
John, I think you were the first one to probably comment on one of those very first TikTok videos. So I appreciate you. You've been there since the beginning.
Yeah,
I credit you with being a loyal supporter in 5 years when it's still going strong.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I want to do, guys, and we won't run super long, but I wanted to make sure tonight was, again, really the last 3 episodes have been one-offs for us. They're not our typical episodes, but I wanted to make sure that Ben could come on and really do what he does best and just get into building relationships and asking questions and doing what he does very, very well. So we'll kind of switch gears from what we were doing. So Ben, I'm completely going to pass the torch to you here, and I may jump in every once in a while with a question. But man, I want you to take the lead and get to know these guys, ask the questions that you love to ask, and let's get it in.
Well, first of all, I don't know if I've met David yet. How's it going, David?
Good. How you been? Hi, John.
Hey, what's up, David?
Do y'all know each other all right, John and David?
Yeah, we know each other. Yeah.
Okay.
We're on Christian TikTok.
On Christian TikTok, yeah. I surf around there once in a while. Do you guys share beliefs pretty closely, or are y'all different?
I don't know. Yeah.
I have no idea.
John and I are both friends and good acquaintances simultaneously. I don't know how that works, but that's kind of what we are.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if you could,
TikTok does.
Yep.
Yeah. I guess so my typical thing, right? So I talked to John. John doesn't like street epistemology.
I was wondering if you were gonna reference that. I'm ready for whatever.
Well, I knew. Yeah. We don't have to go. But I do want to have a conversation, I guess, that would go down that route, and it doesn't have to be pure, and it doesn't have to be, whatever.
No, we can. I'll rock with it. So help me, Moses. If someone makes a clip of times I pause and splices it together, because with street epistemology, someone's gonna burn, and we're not talking hellfire.
For the record, yeah.
This be a bad time to bring Pine Creek in.
Yeah, this will be a real bad time.
Introducing our next special guest.
Yeah.
Well, okay. My favorite thing just to go into, and really the fundamental area that I go into is just how do we, first of all, do you believe God exists? How confident are you that God exists? And then what builds up that confidence? So, I'm willing to have a conversation that's based around those kind of 3 questions. And that's kind of like straight epistemology. And so, David, you believe in God?
I do.
Or not believe in God, that God exists, rather, should be a more specific claim.
Well, I would say yes to both.
Okay. And how confident are you on that scale, 1 to 100?
Well, I know it's a bad idea to say 100, even though I would want to say 100. So I'll at least go 99.9%. Sure.
Well, it's not it is more like an opinion thing. And it's really just to help gauge, whether or not we're going to kind of move on that. John, would you agree with that, or would you go?
So I would say 100, and I'll tell you why I would say 100.
Okay.
Because literally, if I was asked the question, renounce your God or die, I would take it to its totality, to where I would stop breathing. because I would not renounce my God. So I don't think you can get any more than 100 on something like that, because I would make the ultimate choice to die rather than renounce God. So that would be why I say 100. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So we're both at 100, and now, this is a little bit different for me for having two people who disagree, at least like from the outset. But we'll kind of keep going. David, what is it that got you to 99% confidence that God exists?
The other 0.1% is really literally just to keep the conversation open. I actually agree with everything that John said, but whenever you say the 100%, that usually, in a sense, depending on the person, it makes the person not want to have a conversation with you because they just see you as, a know-it-all, or, the conversation shifts away from them being convinced about something to them just wanting to attack you because you are 100% sure about something being true.
Okay.
So I leave that 1%, that 0.1% open, just at least for the conversation. That way someone can be like, well, why 99.9%? Why not just the full 100?
Oh.
That way we can have more of a conversation than me just coming across that way right off the bat. But I would agree with everything that John said. I mean, if it was life or death, I would obviously get rid of the extra 0.1% because there's no conversation at that point. So,
I'm not sure, John. Is that you're if you would mute just if that's going on, if I'm talking to David, or I can hear pretty loud. Somebody.
If I have a kid in my house, I don't know how we got there.
I don't know. It might be me.
It should not be mine.
All right. So David, what was it then that got you to 99, or let's say 100 then? So what is it that builds your kind of percentage? Like what kind of things get you up to 100?
So, John mentioned Ravi Zacharias, and I can't remember the 4 questions, but there's this concept that, every worldview should be able to account for 4 very important questions in life. And John can probably fill in the blanks. I don't remember exactly what they are, but I think it's like origin, purpose, destination, and something else. I can't remember. I think it was morality. Am I right on those, John? I don't know if you can hear me, but basically Ravi Zacharias narrowed like everything that a person wants to know in their life to make a decision about why they should believe in something is based on those 4 questions. And if you can't account for all of them, it's essentially going to leave the other person not feeling like it's a position worth considering. Because like you said earlier, we want to know truth. Huh?
Can I pause you there?
Yeah.
I just want to know, are these 4 questions the reason why you got to the belief that God actually exists?
Yeah, it's a lead in. Yeah.
Well, did you believe in it before you learned about the 4 questions?
Yes. I think that the knowledge, so it would have been from it would have been from a position of maybe you don't necessarily fully know why, the exact why right off the bat, but as you look into the reasons for those things, they fill in. I'm trying to think of a good analogy to. Okay, for example, I play music. Now, I actually met a guy one time who taught himself how to play guitar. Now, he didn't know the notes. He didn't know what finger positions he was supposed to use, but he just played around on the guitar. And then whenever he strummed something that felt or sounded good, he went with that. And then he later would discover that the theory behind it was sound because of, these notes work well together and they produce this sound. In other words, he didn't have to know how to make good music in order to put the notes together in a way in which they sounded good and that they weren't,
Sure.
off key.
Would you say you were at 100% confidence that God was real before you learned about those 4 questions, or before you had that knowledge?
Yes. Yeah. In the same way that. Yeah.
Then so what built up that 100% then?
Pretty much me learning more about my own beliefs and about the world around me. I think that science has become a good tool, and despite the fact that I've actually heard that quite a few theists have actually bowed out of science ever since it started becoming more popular, that's actually made me more confident, because from my perspective, I don't believe that every religion is correct. I think that there's only one correct, and I think that that's obviously mine, partially because I'm biased, but also because as the science comes in, all these other religions start to narrow down. For example, they were talking about Zeus earlier. I think that if a god exists, he has to be outside of his own creation. Otherwise, he's not all powerful. Well, obviously, Zeus.
So I don't mean to keep, because I know that you've got really good explanations for why certain things are important to you. I'm really just trying to get maybe a label for that, and we can dive into it. So, what was the first reason then that got you to a certain level of confidence that God exists?
When I was younger, probably I was introduced to the notion of God. According to my parents, a pastor came to my house and he asked me questions about, do I agree with this? Do I believe in this? That started, I would say, the foundation. But as I grew older, like I said, I started kind of learning more about it and kind of discovering it for myself. So
if you had been born in a different area and introduced to a different religion, still God. All right. So if it's Islam, and you had a Muslim come over and introduce you, do you think that you would still have found the Christian God?
That's a good question. I really don't know. It's possible. I mean, this kind of would sort of get into the whole quantum physics thing. I think, because I think that the God that I believe in, he works in a similar fashion to quantum physics as does, for example, I like using this analogy because I think it's really good. Doctor Strange from the Avengers, about in his foreknowledge, Doctor Strange had the time stone. He was able to look into 14 million possibilities of the outcome in which the Avengers succeeded. And even though he knew that people were still going to die and make decisions that, didn't end, that it was just a big happy story ending where everything turned out to be okay, he chose the one where they won because he was on, the good side. He was, the Avengers are the heroes of the story. So I don't know if you've seen the Avengers, I probably shouldn't have.
Yeah, I love the Avengers. It's probably one of my only a comic book or that's one of my only nerdy kind of areas. So I'm a musician as well, by the way. So I'm a music teacher. That's my jam right there.
What do you teach, real quick? I'm just curious.
So I went to college for percussion.
Nice.
So yeah, that was my main instrument. But I guess I'm trying to get to. So it's an interesting analogy. I'm trying to get to what was it, I guess, that got you there. So. Okay, my question was, and maybe you can answer the same question in a condensed area, because I think my brain kind of looped around. The question was, if you had been born in a different neighborhood and had a Muslim come up and introduce you to Islam, would you have still found the Christian God or God the way that you believe now?
I think it's possible. Like I said, the whole quantum realm thing, it's difficult because there's so many variables. I could not have been, I could have been. And this would tie into my religion actually specifically. But just to answer the question simply, just from that question alone, without getting into the details, I'd have to say right off the bat that I don't know.
Okay. So what is it then if he hadn't have come over and introduced you to God, or if that wasn't it, what kind of got you to the belief, or so the person coming over and sharing God with you, that's what got you introduced. What was it that convinced you then that God exists, or what started building your confidence right there?
I think me and Austin talked about this last time. I would say it was the message of the gospel, and I think that message does encompass, even without knowing everything right off the bat, it encompasses those main questions that people are looking for in this world. The gospel message being that, that for one, that there is a God, so that gives us, a sense of purpose, it gives us our morality.
So the fact that the gospel mentions God, that's what gave you confidence that God exists?
Well, the message of the gospel is that all of us inherently have chosen to walk away from God and his perfect standard of of what is good, and because of that, we have essentially chosen death. I have to give another analogy. It's simple, but if I tell you, this piece of metal is good and pure and it's perfect, but don't put a drop of water on it. Well, the instant that you put a drop of water on it, it's going to be prone to rust, and over time, it's going to rust, and it's eventually going to become useless. So, in the same sense, we all recognize morality. We all recognize that we ought to be a certain way. But and I think that standard comes from God. But once we choose to metaphorically drop the drop of water onto the metal, we have chosen essentially to eventually rust and die, and that's what the Bible talks about. And so the message of the gospel is that Jesus, who is God's Son, even though even though we chose to walk away from God because He loves us, He chose to come after us. He chose to manifest Himself to remove Himself from His realm, wherever that is, and basically make Himself susceptible to the same pains and sufferings that we all go through alongside us. It's essentially to live the life that we couldn't live and die, and to take all of that to the grave. And then, of course, as the message says, He rose again 3 days later, leaving all of that stuff in the grave, rising again, and that everyone who puts their faith in His work likewise will also be raised. And so that answers the question of purpose, morality, and destination, and whatever the fourth one was, because we all want to be loved as humans. We all recognize that there's something within all of us that wants to either fit in or feel loved, whatever expression it is. That every perspective has their own label for what they call it.
So look, I agree with you on that point, that everybody wants to feel loved. What is it? So you brought it back to the gospel message and how that convinced you, that builds up your confidence. All right. What about the gospels gets you to a confidence that God exists?
Well, part of it obviously is a feeling, because, whenever you do something wrong and that you did something wrong, you want to seek to try and reconcile that. And so, if I did something wrong to, you, Austin, or, John, I would probably feel bad. And I would want to ask.
Is that related to the gospel, though? Like the written words in the Bible?
Yes.
Because I feel bad when if I was to hurt, my puppy dog, I'd recognize and have empathy toward that animal. Yet I don't experience that as like a divine thing. So I can empathize with that, or I recognize those feelings. What do you believe is the connection between that and the existence of God?
Well, first, I would say, my words, we can't account for this. First of all, God says that animals and humans are separate beings. So, yes, while the Bible says that we are to subdue and rule over the earth, meaning that we are, metaphorically at the top of the food chain, and God even gave us permission to eat animals. So there's no moral obligation in a sense that, just because we might hurt an animal, that's intrinsically bad. But I would say that, at least as far as food, obviously I don't think that we should torture, creation just for fun, because that's not even what Adam was commanded to do in the Garden of Eden. So it still fits.
Yeah, and I can interject here and just say, if I had a person of a different faith with a completely different set of feelings, and they said, well, because I have a feeling that the universe is speaking to me, that means that the universe is God, and that nature ultimately is my God. Should that person be just as convinced that the universe is God that you are, that Yeshua is God?
Well, convinced, yes. I wouldn't necessarily consider conviction
confident. Should they be just as confident as you that God exists, or that their God exists?
Should I would say no, not from the sense of should, but I would understand how they came to that conclusion, and my word, you could account for that as well. Okay,
so if you are using the same reason, the feeling that when you hurt somebody, it feels, and I'm not sure if you characterize it, and tell me if I'm wrong. If you're saying that the feeling that hurting someone else is evidence that God exists, or that Yeshua exists, and that somebody else says that feeling that's wrong is evidence that the universe is interconnected and that is God, how would you what would you say to that person in terms of, they're 100% confident about their belief and you're 100% confident about your belief based on that feeling? Can you be 100% certain if you're using the same reason?
Yes. Well, I haven't given it thought fully. I could say yes.
So what do you can be 100% certain using the same reason that somebody else is for their belief, and they're 100% certain.
Well, it wouldn't be the same, but I would explain to them. I would talk to them about the differences.
Okay. So let's say that you didn't have a feeling. If you hadn't had any feeling at all, what confidence level would you be that God exists? If you didn't feel bad about hurting somebody, or if that wasn't part of your group of evidences, what percentage would you put yourself if you didn't have that?
If I didn't feel anything, I mean, I feel like that would actually imply that there are probably things that are wrong with me physically.
That's an interesting idea. So if somebody, let's say there's somebody who doesn't have those feelings, a sociopath or a psychopath who doesn't feel empathy when they hurt somebody or hurt something.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be evidence that God doesn't exist if human beings didn't have those feelings?
I would say no.
Okay. So how is it then that that's part of the 100% for you?
What was that?
So if it's possible for a person to not feel those feelings and for God to still exist, what's the reason then, or, what should give us confidence that God actually exists?
Because we can differentiate, and those people are in the fringe minority. There's actually, and God even uses those, I would say, the God that I believe in. In fact, there's a guy who's very popular right now for looking at, for example, the Quran and the Islam worldview, who's actually been doing a lot of things trying to get people out of that. And his name was,
mine is more of a hypothetical. I'm not trying to demonstrate that point or debate that point necessarily. I'm just saying if God would still be, or if we could still be confident that God exists without having that feeling, right? Would you still put yourself at 100% then if you didn't have that feeling?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Short answer, I would say, I think that everyone has the capacity and in some senses know that a God exists.
Everybody knows that God exists.
Yes.
Okay. Can you, what do you mean by that?
We all know that there is something, we all know that there is an intrinsic purpose in life. We all recognize morality. We all, the four big questions, we all recognize that our life isn't just, we're just here.
Would somebody who hadn't heard of the four questions discover those four questions on their own?
Sure, they would recognize them because of the lack of those things existing in their whatever it is that they believed in.
I guess I'm coming at this from a point of, from like a neutral area, and I'm trying to imagine a tribe, and they're out there. There are tribes who have never heard of God or Jesus or anything.
Mm-hmm.
You're saying that, are you making the claim that not only do they believe in God, but they believe in the God that you believe in?
So this is okay. So this is hard. This is a hard thing to explain. I'm not stating that people have direct knowledge of God. I'm saying that people know God exists. I don't know if that makes any sense.
So let's say that. Okay, let's imagine that even I know that God exists. Okay, that's what you're claiming. How then should I get to a place where I'm confident that God exists? Is that the same thing? Is somebody knowing that God exists? Is everybody justified in their confidence that God exists?
No.
Does that question make sense?
Like, are you saying, okay, I have a feeling that a God exists, therefore I am justified in that? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Is that?
Okay. From the broad sense, yes.
Okay, so because I have a feeling that God exists, therefore God exists. Is that the argument that you would agree with?
Sure.
Okay.
I'll go with that for now, yeah.
So let's imagine then that I said, I'm making the claim that everybody knows there are spare ribs in the center of the moon. Everybody knows this in their heart. and you can be justified in knowing that because it's within you. David, is that enough to justify your belief that there are spare ribs in the middle of the moon?
No, and if I may, this is where we get into worldviews, because spare ribs existing in the middle of the moon is not a starting point for why one believes in what they believe in. When we're talking about the origin of our existence in the universe, we know something caused it. When we're looking at the moon, that's not the first inclination that comes to mind, is spare ribs. It's not even a rational position to even start from for looking at why that thing even exists in the first place or why it's there. When we're talking about worldviews, again, the questions that we all want to know, truth, is at the forefront of that question. When we're looking at the moon, I would say that is not. But even, I mean, if you want to go down that road, I mean, I guess you can. But if you want to make that assertion that there are spare ribs, then, I mean, that's your burden of proof. Go for it. If you want to prove it's true.
So now I want to get to the point where I'm not only making the assertion that there are spare ribs in the middle of the moon, I'm going to say, you know that there are spare ribs in the moon. You've felt hunger before. You know that they taste good. And I've left street epistemology at this point. I hope you're
That's fine. That's fine.
But I want to make sure that you understand, you know, I'm saying now that you feel it in your heart, and whether you recognize it or not, there are spare ribs in the moon, and they're waiting for you to eat them. And I know that Pasta Mike would enjoy that analogy a lot. Well, but is that the same reason?
I only popped in because you said spare ribs, so.
But David, is that the same reasoning that you're using?
No, and okay, so I know that this is rhetorical, but when we're talking about worldviews, I'm hoping that you will at least assume that I am believing in what I believe for a reason. And here's why I'm saying this. This is just my perspective. When atheists have to make hypotheticals about things that they don't even believe, it doesn't really give me an incentive to believe them just for the sake of an argument. When I make analogies to point to a specific point, and there are implications behind those points.
Right.
But when we're talking about why we believe what we believe, ribs in the moon is not even a rational starting point. And I would say if you're not going to even assume the truthfulness of your own example, and you're just trying to use it basically as this rhetorical tool because you think that it is on par with what I'm believing in, well, I can see, so I can both see what you're trying to prove, but at the same time, it's because it's rhetorical, it's hard for me to take it seriously in the first place, because I know that you're just making it up for the sake of trying to prove a point that I don't think is even there.
Let me say then, would you say that you can empathize with my point of view, where when you say, you know that God exists, I see it the same way that you're viewing the spare rib analogy. And I mean, in all honesty, I don't know if there's spare ribs in the middle of the moon. I can't prove they're not there, but I don't think they're there. So when you say that you know that God exists, to me, that's on par. And the reasoning is on par with what you're saying.
So, okay, if I could then, so
either that or there's another reason that God exists. So it can't be that you know that God exists, therefore God exists. There's got to be another reason, right?
There could be, yes. And I will say I don't think that everyone there isn't a cookie cutter, method for everyone, in the sense that we all have different personalities, different life experiences, and if a God exists from your perspective, I do believe that God is, because he's a personal God, he tries to bring people to him in a way that's specific or unique to them. For example, there are 5 different love languages, but at the end of the day, we're still talking about love, right?
So are you saying that the 5 love languages from, who was the author of that book?
I don't remember.
So are you saying that because there's a book that says there are 5, like, I think there's probably more than that, like, to communicate love. I can look at you a certain way, and that might be classified under one of the 5 things. But if you categorize behaviors, you can categorize them in all different ways. That doesn't mean that there are love languages. Does that make sense?
Okay. Hey, on this, Hey, on this subject for a second, we gotta push the brakes because I can see the chemistry in you guys' eyes. You're talking about love language. We're gonna be bringing we're gonna be bringing in Pastor John and
Yay!
The host of the show, Austin Oz or whatever his name is. But hey, I just want to say thank you, David, for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Pasta Mike.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Appreciate you. Yeah, thank you, Ben. Appreciate it.
Sure.
It was good.
Yeah, man. No, Ben, if you're wanting to hang out, and Dave, you're welcome to hang out. I was going to say I could put them in on the screen with all of you guys on, but I definitely want Austin and John to have some dialogue. And just before you go, David, I just wanted your opinion. This is more of a question where I've seen your TikToks. I just wanted your opinion on what's your view on the likelihood of religious beliefs being based on geography, like like the demonstrated evidence of where you're located. What's your view on that?
So yeah, so now we're talking about influence, influence, and I would say obviously it's what you end up believing in is going to ultimately, in some sense, come down to what it is that you are influenced by. But in the same way that we wouldn't rationally say, for example, that, well, this person grew up in a bad part of town and he killed 10 people, we'll just give him a slap on the wrist. I don't think that is the right approach to take when we're talking about truth. Yes, and this would actually fit, for example, what my worldview says. The God that I believe in wants people to come to know him freely because that's what love is by definition. If he forces you to believe in him, then it's not really love. And so God has allowed for people to distort his revelation because at the end of the day, he wants people to come to love and know him. And that's why I would say, that's how I was trying to explain to Ben, is that we are all given intrinsically these tools in these intuitions that we know we ought to do and not do. And that ultimately is what I would say points us back to God. In the same way that someone who grew up in the ghetto, while yes, he feels a sense of belonging or what he would consider to be love, is a false distortion, is a false view of what true love is and what it means to, be a part of something that's good, because he's lacking something in his life, and he would resort to being a part of this gang or whatever because he feels that sense there, even though in some ways he knows that what he's doing is wrong. That's kind of how I would boil that down to. So yeah, obviously influence plays a big part, but at the end of the day, everyone's going to be, accountable for their actions. And I think that we all know that there are things that we ought to do and not do. And we choose to suppress that based on our nature, on our influences. And we try to justify and rationalize those things based on trying to fit in or feeling loved, so to speak. So that's kind of how I would, I guess, answer that.
All right. Oz?
Great. Thanks, David. So Ben and David, if you could mute yourself while John and I hold off. No. So obviously, I'm familiar with John's religious or worldview, but for those listening, we actually still have quite a few people listening. So John, I'm doing this not for me, but for people listening. I want to make sure that I don't misrepresent. You are a Bible-believing Christian, and what brand of Christianity would you fall under? Evangelical, non-denominational, Baptist? What do you consider yourself?
So if we're looking at denomination, I would be classified under Pentecostal. But personally, I do not identify as Pentecostal, right? I believe the Bible. I believe what it means to be a Christian is to follow Jesus. So that's my answer.
Okay, so Bible-believing Christian in the United States of America, and we'll take it from there. So, first thing I would ask you, John, is what convinced you, or what led you to believe that this God is that it does exist? What convinces you that this God exists?
What convinces me? How many things do you want?
I want your best case. Give me your best case.
My best case, like I said, like I think I said in the Aetna debate, I think God is the more plausible reason for the unanswered questions of science. Like right before he left, I was going to get into how I really wanted to hear his position on a universe from nothing and stuff like that, right? But I think God is the more plausible explanation for why we are alive, right? So now we have to answer the question, which God? So I come to Yahweh. I come to my faith based off of many things. I think the Word of God is true. I think that I have seen, experienced the love of God. I have seen other people experience the love of God as well as the power of God to change lives, to break shackles, you name it, marriages mended. So, I mean, I could literally go on for a long time as to why I believe what I believe, but that's if you want to break it down into the most simple answer, it's because I choose to believe it, because I feel it is truth. So.
Okay, so you made a key statement there. You choose to believe. So why do you choose? What has caused you to make that choice? Why did you choose to believe that is true?
Why did I choose to believe it? Because whenever you make a choice, it's because you're weighing options. So if I have 2 sodas in my fridge, I have a Dr. Pepper, I have a Mountain Dew. I'm looking at the options that I have, and I'm making a decisive choice based off what I believe I want. What do I want inherently? When we're choosing restaurants, how do you choose what restaurant you go to? Do you choose McDonald's? Do you choose Taco Bell? Do you choose Burger King? What are you hungry for? So I really think that the answer comes down to why I chose Christianity is because it satisfied that hunger and it satisfied that thirst.
Okay, so what it came down to was experiences, and then you just said it. You bought it or you believed in it because it's what you wanted. It's not because you proved it to be true or anybody else proved it to be true, but that's what you wanted and what you wanted to be true or to believe in. Is that correct?
No, I said I believe it to be true. I said that in my first statement. So I in the analogy I just gave, no, I did not mention my statement again. But in my first statement, when you asked me why I believe it, I said my very last words were because I believe it is true.
Well, but I wrote it down. You said it's what you want.
In the second statement, yes. But if you're going to come in and say I didn't say it because I believed it to be true, then you're actually factually incorrect, because my first statement dealt with why I believe it is true.
Okay, so let's rewind. Let's rewind because I'm taking notes because I want to make sure we're accurate.
Yeah, that's fine.
You said you've seen and experienced certain things, right? Where it's marriages brought together, or you gave two or three examples, and you came back around to it's what I want. So I could want to believe a lot of things.
So it's not just want, though. You're taking one thing I said out of a overall blanket statement as to why I believe what I believe, and you're taking the one thing out of that statement that you want to ask questions off of, having to do with want.
No.
Want was not the only thing I mentioned.
Okay. So
it wasn't just want or desire. It was that I think I phrased it as, when you're looking for a restaurant, you know what satisfies your hunger. Or when you're looking for a drink in the fridge, you know what satisfies your thirst. That does not have to do with want, and desire does not always have to do with, man, I want this. It also has to do with nourishment. It has to do with what is going to fulfill your need at the time.
Okay, so then I'll grant that. So how did you get to this want, this longing, this desire, this thirst, however you want to describe that? How did you then arrive to a God? How did you arrive to that God?
Yeah, so I think hunger and thirst for knowledge, hunger and thirst for answers to the hardest questions are in every single person. I think we're all searching for answers in some way or in another way. And so the reason I came to Christianity is one, because yeah, I was definitely raised in it. You and I have talked about that on more than one occasion. I was raised in it, but when I looked at my beliefs critically and I decided, okay, why do I believe what I believe? And I looked for the evidence and I looked for what makes my belief reasonable. I found more confirmation than something that than something that made me doubt my faith. I found greater confirmation for something that reinforces my faith.
Okay, and that's awesome. Thank you. And
Yeah.
what were those things that solidified that belief or faith in your God? How did that happen?
So what were the things that solidified my faith? Again, I think there's a lot of things I could say. I'm trying to give you just a blanket statement so the conversation can continue without giving too many components. But I just come down. I come back to I believe there is evidence that declares that it is true, and so want to get into that evidence, we can, or whatever.
No, it's not even a broad. I want for like authentically. I want to know from John, like through those things, what pointed you towards God? What convinced you that it was the God that fulfilled all that, the thirst and the longings and the hunger, whatever descriptions you want to provide there. What convinced you that it was God that satisfied all that?
I would say everyone is hungry for something. Like I said, I think everyone is always looking for the missing pieces of their life, and when those pieces are filled in, you just know it. Like, for example, someone who is.
So John, I want to interrupt. You keep saying everyone and anyone. I want to know about you. What convinced you?
Yeah, I said that. Like I said, and I'll just give the analogy I was going to give. When someone is single, right, and a person comes along that they fancy. Okay, let's look at some really culturally weird words there. But when someone comes along that they like and that they begin to care about, and that person becomes a part of their life, there is nothing that inherently is just like, oh wow, I'm convinced you're the missing piece. You just recognize that your loneliness was gone, and now you have someone, and now you're not lonely anymore. So in the same way that our relationship with God is so often in the Bible referred to as a marriage, it's referred to as a relationship. So in the same way that when you're lonely and you have someone come along and fills in that empty piece and that empty space in your life, that's exactly what I felt with God, is that there was a recognition when God's presence filled my life. There was a recognition when I felt the love of God, when I made the decision to follow Christ and I made the decision to pursue ministry, there was a recognition inherently that piece was filled. So I could ask, like you, we love Miss Oz in the comments. I get to talk with her every now and again. But what made you realize that she was the missing piece? What convinced you?
Well, but that has, and that's I love that you try to take that. That attack point and try to shift, but that's my relationship.
Like I said, my faith is a relationship. I stated that very clearly, and I compared it to relationships that we can have in humanity. And
but I have to stop there. Because I have a relationship with somebody that I can prove exists. Okay, so that's not a relevant discussion. What I want to know is how you came to the point that you believe in this God. That's what I'm trying to get down to, is how are you convinced that this God exists, and you're talking to somebody that was a Christian for 30 years, and now I find no good reason to believe that this God exists. So I want to know more true things than not. So John, help me understand how did you get through the want, the thirst, the desire? That's how you described it or explained it. Those thirsts, those desires. How did you then come to the inroad that this God is the thing that fulfills those thirsts and those desires? How did you come to that place?
The missing piece was filled in. The relationship where where I felt like there was something missing was filled in with God. In the same way, someone lonely, when they have someone come alongside and they have a relationship with that person, the missing piece is just filled in, and you recognize it without any physical, without any evidence that could be tested or that could be put into a lab. You just recognize it.
So that was my next question. So yeah. if that's what we're going to keep going back to is that, then I want to know for me, because I truly want to know more true things than not. So John, of the things you've claimed so far tonight, how do we put those things to the test? How do we measure them, and how do we convince people like myself and Ben that what you're talking about and what you've experienced is true? Because so far, what I've heard is personal experience. That's not necessarily evidence. It's your evidence because it's personal experience, and I can't take that away from you. But that doesn't mean that we can test it and duplicate it. So how do we test that and then convince people like Ben and I that what you have felt, what you've seen, what you've heard is truth?
So you asked me directly what my evidence was, right? You asked me how I knew that
I said that's your. I said your personal experience is your evidence. I can't take that from you. Okay. So that's yours. What I'm asking.
Can you go back to Ben and David for just a second? I got to take care of something.
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
Things come up.
Yeah. You're good. Ben, I saw you pop in. What were you going to say?
Yeah, well, and I can ask David this. Would you concur with his reasoning about, like, God coming into your heart and fulfilling a relationship? Does that resonate with you?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it possible to have like a relationship with an imaginary person and to feel that fulfillment, in your view?
I would say no. I've looked into this a little bit. Neurologically and psychologically speaking, a lot of people who, especially when they're younger, who have imaginary friends. I actually had imaginary friends when I was younger. I knew they weren't there. I knew that it was just a way that I just coped with being alone because my sister died at a young
my point
age.
is that
12 and
is it possible to have that imaginary friend that fulfills that need in your heart? So for instance, there are people who struggle with interpersonal relationships, and so they'll visit therapists, and those therapists will recommend things like sex dolls or inanimate objects to feel that type of intimate connection with another person. Is it possible that as humans, I can totally get on board with the idea that we have a need for relationships and social gatherings. But is it possible to get that from something like a God that isn't there? Like, so maybe is it possible that the belief is helpful and fulfills that for us?
Like I said, no, because if you're, I really think that if your belief is in something that not only isn't there, but that you, in a sense, know isn't there, that you're always going to feel like something's missing. For example, I am going through a divorce right now, so I don't have my wife here. So I have moments where I can very, very literally distinct the difference between that kind of relationship versus, my cat. My cat's great, and even though I know he's there, even though I can see him, my cat cannot provide the same kind of relationship that I had with my wife. And even though it's nice to have a companion, so to speak, around, nothing is ever going to be able to fit that, like John was saying, nothing's ever going to be able to fit that type of gap that was there when my wife was there. And again, when I was younger, I knew when I was playing pretend. I knew when I was imagining that something or someone was there, and I knew that it was fake. This is nowhere near the same thing. I think that John is actually pretty spot on with what he's saying, and even the fact that I can even take a human relationship that I know was there, or still kind of is there, and something else that I call God can do something like that but greater, is, I would say, not only at least maybe not proof, but evidence that there is something there, but evidence also further that that thing is the void that John was speaking of,
So
that nothing else.
So I keep wanting to go back to like the example where like a Hindu says like Vishnu or whichever god is the one that makes you feel good, I guess, or fulfills that. If a Hindu comes up and says that god fulfills that for them, and they know it's true because they have the feeling, and they're at 100% based on that feeling, is that a reliable like reason to get to 100% confidence that belief is true if you're both coming to different conclusions using the same reason?
Mm-hmm. Well, so this would get into, again, distorted revelations, because I do believe in the spiritual realm. I do believe that there are things that the Bible calls angels and demons, and I do believe that they have
hold on, but we're talking about the feelings, and I'm sorry I'm cutting you off. I know that can get frustrating, so let me know if you really got to keep if it's super important, but I'm trying to get to the feeling.
Yes.
If you're using that as part of your 100, and another person's using the feeling to get to their 100, is it really the most honest thing to say that feeling is part of that 100%?
Wait, what can you say? What do you mean?
If the feeling that God is filling your heart, that feeling is part of your 100%. That's taking up at least 1% of that 100%. And another person uses that same reason to get to 100% on their conflicting view.
Mm-hmm.
How is it possible for you both to use the same reasoning and have the same 100% confidence?
Well, this would get into relative things. I believe them that what they experience right now feels better than not having that thing. That this is the point that I was trying to sort of get into, is that if my God is real, then there are these things that are called demons, which are essentially the angels that used to be in heaven with God who rebelled against him.
So hold on. Is this an extra layer to? I know. Is this an extra belief then? Because what this is, that's an extra claim that I don't. And I know I'm starting to debate now.
Can I ask you a question to kind of try and get to the point of what I'm trying to say? Okay. If a superior God exists, do you think that he would be capable of writing a book that would be able to account for all of these kinds of questions that you're asking me right now?
If God exists,
as compared to every other type of God or false God or whatever it is that you want to call it, do you think that an all-powerful God whose intent is to bring people to the knowledge of him would be able to write a book or create some kind of revelation that would be able to answer these kinds of questions that you're posing to me right now, that could be comparable to other religions or other supposed gods?
Well, I can answer that with the question, is the book the reason why you believe God exists?
No, but I'm asking the question to get to the point of why I'm explaining them.
I know we're talking over each other. If the book didn't convince you, why should it convince me?
Well, I'm not asking it to convince you. I'm asking if it makes logical sense for it to be the case.
It's a hypothetical. It's like if
I'm trying to answer your questions, and it's hard to give you the answer because the answer is in the explanation that I'm trying to give. And I don't feel like I'm being allowed to give the full answer because the answer is in the explanation. And I'm going to be a little bit frank, but this is the problem with these kinds of shows, is that atheists want short answers for complicated questions. And if I can't be allowed to give the full answer, then you're not really asking for the answer to the question. You're looking for something that answers the way that you want the question to be answered. If that makes sense.
Sometimes I'm looking for like a label or and I know that might not be the best thing. So I apologize if there's more within it. So what didn't you get to that you wish you could have?
Okay, that's what I'm trying to say. So logically speaking, it's a hypothetical. I'm not trying to pull a gotcha. I'm not trying to say this proves you believe God exists. I'm just trying to, just for the sake of the argument, do you think it's logically possible that if there is a one true God, that he is capable of writing a book or producing some kind of revelation that would be superior to any type of other supposed revelation that would try to fight against it or rival it? By definition of all powerful, I think that kind of answers the question. So what I'm saying is that if that belief is true, and I do believe that the answers can be found in the Bible for these questions that you're asking, so to answer your question, the person who thinks that they believe in what they consider to be the one true God, from their perspective of comparing their life to a life of no God versus a life with a God, whatever that thing is, yeah, I think that it's going to be better. And I do think that whatever that thing is real. But like I said, my belief system can account for that. There is a such thing as false prophets, false teachers, false gospels, and also angels and demons. Demons specifically being the things that are set specifically to lure people away from the one true God, and literally to create false gods, to lure them into this false sense of hope, this false sense of love, because that's what his intention is. So that's the point that I'm trying to get at is I would believe them that they have experienced something, that they believe in something. And so what I would do is I would try to learn about their worldview, engage in their worldview, see what it is that they specifically believe in, and then give them something to compare to, because they may not have heard of anything, but they still know that the same kind of feeling that I have, the love, whatever you want to call it, is there in a sense. But again, I would say that this would be a distorted revelation, and I think that it would be influenced by things that aren't really God, and that would fit the criteria, that would fit the worldview of what I believe in, and my worldview can account for that. For example, you said Vishnu. What is that? Is that Buddhism?
That's Hinduism. There are several gods. Vishnu is the creator god.
Okay, so and you even see this in the Bible. People who create gods, and what ends up happening in these stories is that these people end up revealing the true God by superior revelation. And this is what convinces those people that their God is false, or at the very least is inferior to the one true God. And so I would take the same approach. That's why I was trying to bring up Zeus. There might be people who believe in Zeus. Well, what I would do is I would delve into their worldview to show that even though I understand their reasons for believing that thing, that their beliefs are a distortion. And what I would say, for example, is that, you say, well, could God be found in creation or in nature? I would say no, but the way that I could point back to my God being the superior God is the fact that we know that the earth began to exist. Well, if God exists within a creation, that doesn't really make him God. So I can easily just show that because of the fact that everyone else's God depends on the existence of the universe to exist, that by definition makes them, even if that God is real, an inferior God to mine, and essentially not worth paying attention to. And then of course I would point them to the gospel and point them to, the concept of morality and sin, and the fact that they still recognize that there is this void in their life that they're trying to fill, and show why my God is the better one through the gospel message. That's that. So I know, it's a long answer, but this is kind of philosophy. And there's a saying that I've heard that philosophy is best done slow. I know we want these answers just like boom. We just want to that's our culture. Literally, we want things now because that's the way that our society works. But I think that when it comes to philosophy is best done slow, and you really have to involve all of these complicated topics and questions to get to the satisfactory answers. So that would be, I guess, I see that John is back, so I want to give him the.
Well, and I just wanted to, I'm not challenging the points, I guess. I'm not saying that Vishnu is more likely, right? I'm an atheist. Right. I don't believe that Vishnu exists.
I get that was rhetorical. Yeah.
No, and it's not only that it's rhetorical. I'm trying to look at the reasons that you feel that you have that God exists.
Yes.
And taking each reason and comparing it to a reason that somebody else might have for a conflicting claim.
Sure.
And if you have the same reason for different claims, I don't think that that reason is a good reason. Therefore, I will dismiss it.
Yes, and sure. So the short answer then to that would be is that more likely than not, the God, if I had to challenge that briefly and directly, I would say that the fact that their God exists dependently of nature would in and of itself be something to consider as to, the validity of their God. And it wouldn't be the same, because according to my worldview, my God does not exist within nature. His existence is not reliant on the existence of nature in the same way that Zeus's is or Vishnu's is. The God that I believe in would be outside of those things and would be the cause of those things. Zeus can't be the cause of thunder and lightning, because thunder and lightning depends on the universe to exist in the first place. So that would automatically disqualify him as either a God that is actually real or a God that is even worth considering as for worship.
Well, Oz, do you you want to jump in, or since we're back?
So I'll put a statement on that and jump in with John here briefly, because I do have to get up for work in the morning, just like the rest of us.
I got to wake up in 6 hours. So
yeah, me too. So I'm gonna try to wrap this up quickly. But really, what I just heard, and this isn't just David knows I have mad love for him, and him and I talk even off platform. What I just heard, and I hear from many theists, especially Christians, is my God's better than your God. My daddy's better than your daddy. My daddy's stronger than your daddy. And that's what I hear when I hear that. And I hate to say that, but that's what it sounds like. And I hate.
I understand that.
I hate having to have that stance, but being a former Christian and understanding that argument 100%, like that's now what I hear when I hear that. But John, coming back to our conversation, and now you and I are probably a little bit out of the loop here, but as far as where we
sorry, my daughter woke up because she heard my voice because I was too close, so I had to.
No. You know what? Being a dad is 1 billion times more important than this YouTube channel. So good for you. I got 6 kids, and it's a circus around here sometimes trying to do a YouTube channel.
Yeah, if these people are still here, I want you right now comment how cute my daughter is, so I can go look at it later and be like, yeah.
Yeah. For the record, Pastor John is one ugly son of a bitch, but his kids are cute. Just so you know.
I'll take what I can get.
But real quick before we wrap it up, so John, this is what I want to know. We can go through the semantics all day, and you and I know the Bible, you and I know Christianity, but I honestly want to know at the root of it. When nobody else is around, you look in the mirror, and it's not your wife, it's not your kids, it's not your pastor, it's just you looking at the man in the mirror. What is it that convinces you, or I guess grounds or solidifies your belief in your God, a God?
Perfect phrasing of the question. The mirror is what convinces me, because I'm able to look at myself and recognize I'm here, I'm living, and I'm either an accident, the greatest cosmic accident of the universe, that I got lucky. I got lucky enough. I got lucky enough to be here talking with you, be able to have intellectual conversations. So when I look in the mirror and I see another man staring back, and that man is able to rationalize, is able to use logic, is able to use reason, is able to look at evidence and see what type of evidence convinces him, then that man in the mirror is the reason why I believe in God.
Okay, so that would be when we strip all the things down, that would end up being a God of the gaps argument, because you're just saying because you don't understand the complexity of what you're looking at in the mirror. Because us as humans, you, myself, Ben, David, we are complex human beings. We are complex beings. That doesn't mean there's a God. That doesn't mean.
So are you saying that a God? So are you saying that a God cannot exist that can fill in the gaps of your lack of knowledge?
Say that again.
Are you saying that a God cannot exist that can fill in the gaps to lack of knowledge?
No, I've never said that. What my position is.
So why are you accusing me of God of the gaps?
Well, because you just said, I asked you what convinced you that there was a God. You said when you look in the mirror that the image that looks at you in the mirror convinces you that God is real. What I'm saying is that when I look in the mirror, I'm not convinced of a God. That's what you said.
Yeah.
Because I look in the mirror and see, a half intelligent human being, but yeah. So I don't know. What's the connection between that and a God? I guess.
Yeah.
Exactly. That has to be demonstrated. I mean, you know what I mean. That's the same thing.
That's what I mean. It's a God of the gaps. So there's no connection between looking in the mirror and connecting it to a God, unless that's what you want to believe. And that's what I was getting to with John earlier. That's what you want to believe. I don't want to believe that. I want to know truth. I don't want to believe anything. Just like a business plan, I don't want to believe that my business plan is going to work out. I want to have certain knowledge that my business plan is going to work out because I've measured and I've weighed and I've demonstrated everything that suggests that this is going to work out. I don't look in the mirror and just, I hope this shit works out.
At least a confidence.
So I mean, what do you want to work out in life?
Well,
what does it matter at the end of it? What does it matter when you breathe your last breath? Ultimately,
to me, like John, to me, and I won't answer for Ben, but I think from talking to him, we're going to have a similar response to this. To me, it doesn't matter because just like you don't know what it was like before you were born, you're not going to know what it was like when you're dead. You're not going to know those things
from your worldview. Exactly.
And it's up to me. I enjoy life. I enjoy eating. I enjoy sex. I enjoy all of the things that there are to enjoy in life. And
absolutely.
So those, I mean, what more do you need? It's a rock. It's a party up in here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I enjoy everything that you just said. So we enjoy the same things. We enjoy the same lives. Mm-hmm. So if you are wrong, I mean, this comes down to Pascal's wager, right? It's that idea.
No.
Well, I'm excited to hear the rest of this.
Yeah, go ahead.
No. I mean, that's what I'm referencing is I'm referencing Pascal's wager. So because if we live fulfilled lives, right? We both are able to we both are able to love. We both are able to procreate. We're able to have children. We're able to have jobs. Like you mentioned, the business plan. You want the business plan to work out, even if I am wrong. And God does not exist and my faith is meaningless. How does the business plan not still work out for me? I've lived my life. I've loved. I've enjoyed sex. I've enjoyed food. I've enjoyed drink. I've enjoyed all these things. So how does the business plan not work out for me?
So you get to enjoy all the same things we do. I'm on board 100%. So the thing that happens though is that it's like an irrelevant point to make to whether or not a God actually exists. So you can live as though God exists and have a happy, healthy life. I've got no problem with that. There are conflicts, and you would agree, there are beliefs out there where people are harming their children, kicking their children out of homes. They are not allowing young women to have abortions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they are based on religious belief.
So would you would you say that atheists don't encounter those same evils? It's not just a religion.
From a public policy standpoint, I think atheism or a secular government avoid.
Well, I'm not talking about public policy. You're referencing specific examples. I'm sorry, I don't want to talk over you.
Okay.
So you did not reference policy, you did not reference law, you referenced specific examples in personal relationships and lives, such as abortion or such as religion beating their children. It happens the same way whether you believe in God or not. Evil exists and there's no getting around it.
Okay, so before
it's not
we
just
log off,
from religion. Yeah.
Before we log off tonight to get back down to the brass tacks, what I want to know, John, is we talked about with you, and David both. What I want to know, John, is when you look in the mirror. I already asked, and you said, "Well, just looking in the mirror convinces me that God is real."
Yeah.
Like that's what you said. So when you look in the mirror and and you see John, and this isn't me being funny at all,
No,
because
you're fine.
I look at all four of us on screen and we have our flaws. If
Absolutely.
if the four of us look in the mirror and we say, "Holy shit, there's a God," damn, God loves ugly dudes. You know, first and foremost.
What is the Imago Dei?
But on excuse me again, but John, I'll ask one last time before we sign off, and we can do this again another time and dig in further. But I still don't after an hour or so and I know you took a little bit of break, but an hour or so of talking, I still don't understand in a simplistic form. I don't understand what your conviction is that God, your God specifically, the Bible God, exists. I want to know that. I don't care about anybody else's belief. I want to know why John believes that his God exists.
Yeah. So I like we were talking earlier, I recognized the piece that was missing, and that when God became a real part of my life and not just what I was raised with and not just what I was taught, I recognized the missing piece filled in. It's the love of God that draws me to God, and the recognition of that love in relationship with him is what gives me every reason to recognize why he is real to me. If it's not about anyone else, and it's not about convincing you, and it's not about convincing anyone else, and if it's just about why it is to me, like you referenced, then that is the reason why.
Great. I love perfect answer. Perfect answer. And you hit it on the nail as far as what a believer should say. And you talked about the love.
Good. I'm a believer, so I'm glad.
I know, and you hit it on the head, and I'm glad you did. And you mentioned the love of God, the love of Christ. So why, John, if this is a all-loving God that loves every single one of us the same way, why am I not convinced the way you're convinced, John?
Why are there plenty of people that are convinced in the way you're not convinced?
No. I asked you a question. You don't get to answer a question with a question.
You can, yeah.
No.
If we're just having a discussion.
How do we? Well, no. Yes,
I have no obligation.
Question. Well, no, you're making a claim. You're making a claim that based on that love that you feel, that you have this belief of certainty, not just like, oh, I hope it's real, but you're claiming certainty.
Yeah.
Then why, especially for someone that was a believer for 30 plus years, why am I not as certain as you are in that love that you're talking about, the 1 Corinthians 13 type love? Why am I not as convinced as you are? Because I believed with my whole heart.
How am I supposed to read your motivations? How am I supposed to read your intentions? What evidence do I use to gauge why you are not convinced?
No. You can't do that. I'm talking about your God.
You're saying why are your question directly?
You're convinced.
Why am I not convinced?
No, you are convinced that your God is real, right? And that he's a God that's all loving, right? And I'm going to imagine you believe the whole scripture. He's all knowing, all loving, all yada, 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 right?
Yeah.
So why would he make himself that real to you?
See, now you're changing the question.
No. And I'm sorry, and I didn't mean to do that.
You literally said, "Why am I not convinced?"
Okay,
that was your original question.
So for the record, everybody listening, I apologize if that's how it came off. That's not how I meant it. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. I hate when people do that to me, and if that's what I did, I apologize. What I was trying to say is,
heart, love.
Oh, I look. I know you.
I'll roast you on TikTok tomorrow for it. No worries.
I don't give a shit.
Just take a clip right there. Make sure this is up so I can get that apology and make a TikTok out of it.
And do because you know what? Right here on our channel, if I make a mistake, I'll own it. I have no problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I say anything, I want to do that too. So yeah, Go ahead.
But if if that was the case, that it is a all loving, all knowing God, why can he not make himself as real to you as he does to me? And that's the last question, and we're gonna wrap it up because we're at 3.5 hours and I gotta go to fucking bed.
He can. He can, 100%. And he did. You were a Christian at one point, weren't you? So at one point in your life, you recognized that
Because I was indoctrinated.
Huh? But regardless of indoctrination, there was a point in your life where you recognized, and I'm not trying to no Drew Scotsman you, but only you can answer this question. If you say I wasn't really a Christian and it was just indoctrination, fine, I'll accept that. Cool. But if you're saying I was a true Christian, then you are getting rid of indoctrination. Now you are saying I was a Christian on my own merits. Indoctrination has nothing to do when you claim Christianity for yourself. So when you claim that, so were you a true Christian or not? In your own view,
Looking back at it, and I can honestly say I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, so if you didn't know, then you just haven't experienced the love of God yet. If you did know and you were a Christian, then you did experience the love of God and rejected it later on in life. So I would not say that you have not experienced it. I cannot answer the question for you on whether you did or whether you didn't, whether you were a Christian, whether you weren't a Christian. I can't answer that question. What I can do is say, if you were a Christian, you experienced the love of God and you lived by it on your own merits, not just indoctrination. If you weren't a Christian, you never were a Christian, then you just haven't experienced the love of God yet.
Okay, but isn't that we can? So I'll make this statement, not a question.
Yep.
That way we can pick it up another time. I would say that is if there's a all creating, all knowing. I'm sorry, a God that creates, he's all knowing and all loving, all powerful. It's his responsibility to do that for me or for you or for David or anybody else. It's not your job or David's job or even my job. It's his job to show himself true.
So if he is real, what you're saying is if he is real, he now is required to follow your rules.
No, he's the creator. It's his job as the creator.
So you're telling, if God is real, you're saying I'm giving God a job. So how does that work?
No. What I'm saying is, if he is the creator and he knows he wants me to serve him, he wants me to love him, he wants me to be with him for eternity, he's going to do what's required to convince me that he's real. If he doesn't, he just leaves me on an island somewhere wondering what's real and what's not.
What if the conversation we're having right now is God trying to convince you that he is real? What if every conversation you've had with a theist, the representation of all of these conversations is exactly God trying to make himself known to you through people? Because that's constantly, if we're talking about the God of the Bible, using people is something he rather does often.
Okay, and as soon as I have demonstrable evidence that there's some type of presence of a God, maybe I'll acknowledge it's real. But I haven't seen any of that. But just having conversations with other men that live the same lives that I do, they just believe in a God, does not prove that there's a God.
Never said it did.
Well, we just said that these conversations might prove that that's what you just said.
I didn't say that it is the proof that there is a God. I said I might be. I didn't say I am the proof of God talking to you right now.
So you could
said,
be.
I could be how God is trying to get your attention, or other conversations that you've had. I'm not saying that's an absolute fact, but I say it's a possibility. Because God uses people. It's consistent with Scripture.
Well, and I just talked to a guy a couple of days ago that said that toasters and vacuum machines and fucking cars were God. So who the fuck?
That is not my fault. Anyway.
Anyway, gentlemen, I appreciate it. First, David, or I'm sorry, John, thanks for jumping on. We got you the invite, and we appreciate you being there. and coming on, having the late night conversation with us. And
absolutely, I love you guys.
I know we love you. We love you, Pastor Joan.
Give me
Joan.
evidence that you love me. I'm not convinced.
All right. Well,
show me evidence.
Ask Pastor for that shit. But David's been on with us several times, and I feel like tonight was finally a fun night for him. We got contested effort, but it was a fun night. And David, as always, I appreciate you coming on.
Absolutely,
appreciate you, Austin, and you too, John, and you too, Ben. Even though I don't know if you're still there.
I think Ben dipped.
Ben's a teacher. He got you ready for class in the morning.
Absolutely.
But
it's always a pleasure, Austin. It was an enjoyable time. I knew it was going to turn into more when that guy left. I'm like, oh, here we go. I'm still here. The floor didn't fall from underneath me. No, it's fine. I enjoy these conversations. And
well, and I just want to say this, and we I'm not gonna lie, we would probably use this for a clip in the future. But David and John are perfect examples of the guests that come on the Atheist Roundtable, and we have a blast, man. And we have contested conversations, and we have heated conversations, passionate conversations. But these two gentlemen are proof or evidence that at the Atheist Roundtable, we build friends with everybody, Christians, it doesn't matter, and we have a blast. We have great conversations, and we end the night still friends. We don't hate each other. We do this. So,
we will. So, I will write a rap about you tomorrow. No.
But no, appreciate you guys. We're gonna wrap it up. We're gonna hit the video, and I'd love to chat with you guys just for like 2 seconds afterwards. But we're gonna hit the video. Peace out.